Please don't hit me. I'm already hurt. Those 7 words, whispered through a storm-soaked night, would shatter everything Ethan Walker thought he knew about safety, love, and the monsters that hide behind respectable faces. What started as a near accident in his driveway became a fight against a predator who'd convinced the world he was a savior. This is the story of Maya, the woman who refused to stay silent. Stay with me until the end and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The rain came down like divine judgment that November night, transforming the quiet suburban streets of Riverside into something biblical. Sheets of water obscured everything beyond the reach of Ethan Walker's headlights as he navigated the familiar turns toward home, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his mind already racing ahead to the mountain of work waiting for him after he tucked Grace into bed. In the back seat, his 8-year-old daughter fought sleep, her small face pressed against the rain-streaked window, watching the world dissolve into watercolor darkness. They'd been at her piano recital, one of the countless rituals Ethan had maintained with religious devotion since Sarah died 3 years ago. Keep the routine. Keep Grace's world stable. Keep moving forward, even when every fiber of his being wanted to collapse under the weight of single parenthood and grief that never quite loosened its grip on his throat. "Daddy, the rain sounds angry," Grace murmured, her voice thick with exhaustion. Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his heart doing that thing it always did when she said something that reminded him she was growing up without her mother. "It's just water, sweetheart. Nothing to be scared of." "I'm not scared," she said, and he believed her. Grace had inherited Sarah's quiet courage, that steel spine wrapped in gentle kindness. "I just think the sky is sad about something." Before Ethan could respond, his headlights caught movement, a flash of pale fabric, a human form stumbling directly into the path of his SUV. His foot slammed the brake pedal so hard the vehicle fishtailed on the slick asphalt, and for one heart-stopping moment, he was certain he'd killed someone. The seatbelt locked across his chest as momentum threw him forward. Grace let out a small cry behind him. The car stopped 3 feet from the figure, who stood frozen in the glare of the headlights, like a deer caught in the moment before death. But this was no deer. This was a woman, young, drenched, her clothes plastered to a painfully thin frame, her arms thrown up defensively in front of her face. "Jesus Christ," Ethan breathed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He threw the car into park and reached for the door handle, but the woman's reaction stopped him cold. She dropped to her knees in the middle of the street, her hands still raised, her face contorted in pure animal terror. Even through the rain and the windshield, Ethan could see her mouth moving, forming words he couldn't hear but could somehow feel in his bones. "Stay in the car, Grace," he commanded, his voice sharper than he intended. He grabbed his jacket from the passenger seat and pushed out into the deluge. The rain hit him like a physical assault, cold and merciless, soaking through his dress shirt in seconds. He approached slowly, hands visible, the way you'd approach a wounded wild thing that might bolt or bite. "Ma'am? Are you hurt? I almost—" He stopped when he got close enough to hear her. She was whispering, the same phrase over and over, a desperate mantra. "Please don't hit me. I'm already hurt. Please don't hit me. I'm already hurt. Please don't—" "I'm not going to hurt you," Ethan said, raising his voice above the rain but keeping it gentle. He crouched down to her level, staying several feet back, his jacket forgotten in his hand. "I promise you, I'm not going to hurt you." The woman's eyes, wide and dark and absolutely haunted, flicked to his face, then away, then back again, as if she couldn't quite believe he was real, or perhaps couldn't believe he wasn't a threat. She was shaking so violently her teeth chattered, whether from cold or fear or both, Ethan couldn't tell. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe late 20s, with dark hair plastered to her skull and hollows under her cheekbones that spoke of missed meals and sleepless nights. A purple bruise spread across her left temple, half hidden by her wet hair. Her knees were scraped raw through torn jeans, blood mixing with rainwater. "My name is Ethan," he said, speaking slowly, clearly. "Ethan Walker. I live right there." He gestured toward the house 50 yards up the street, its porch light a beacon in the storm. "I have a little girl in the car. We were just coming home. I didn't see you. You ran right in front of me. Are you hurt?" The question seemed to confuse her, She looked down at herself as if seeing her body for the first time, noticing the blood on her knees, the way her hands were shaking, the sodden clothes that clung to her frame. When she looked back up at him, something in her expression cracked, and Ethan saw past the terror to the exhaustion underneath, the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been running for far too long. I don't... Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. I don't know where I am. You're in Riverside, Ethan said. Connecticut. Do you live around here? She shook her head, a jerky, uncertain movement. I've been walking. I don't know how long. Days, maybe. I saw the lights of town and I just... Her words dissolved into a shiver so violent it looked painful. Behind him, Ethan heard his car door open. Grace, I said stay... But his daughter was already there, her small hand slipping into his, her Hello Kitty raincoat hood pulled up over her dark curls. She looked at the kneeling woman with those solemn brown eyes that were so achingly like Sarah's. Daddy, she's scared, Grace said simply, as if this explained everything, as if fear was something she understood intimately, and maybe she did. Maybe loss had taught his daughter to recognize suffering in others. The woman stared at Grace, and something shifted in her face. The raw terror softened into something else. Confusion, maybe, or wonder. Hi, Grace said, in that small, clear voice she used when she was being brave. I'm Grace. You're very wet. Despite everything, the rain, the fear, the absolute insanity of the situation, the corner of the woman's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Grace, go back to the car, Ethan said, but without much conviction. The woman hadn't flinched when Grace appeared. If anything, the child's presence seemed to calm her. What's your name? Grace asked, ignoring her father completely. The woman opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Maya, she finally said, and Ethan had the distinct impression she'd just made that decision. My name is Maya. That's pretty, Grace said. Like the month. Are you running away from something bad? Grace! Ethan's voice came out sharper than he intended, horror washing through him at his daughter's bluntness. But Maya, if that was really her name, didn't seem offended. Instead, she looked at Grace with something like respect. Yes, Maya said quietly. Something very bad. Grace nodded as if this made perfect sense. My mommy died when I was 5. That was bad too. But Daddy says we're safe now because we have each other. She tugged on Ethan's hand. Daddy, we should take her inside. She needs to be safe too. Ethan looked from his daughter to the trembling woman still kneeling in the street, rain streaming down her face like tears. Every rational instinct screamed at him that this was dangerous, that he had no idea who this person was or what she was running from, that he had a daughter to protect and couldn't just bring a stranger into their home. But he also couldn't leave her here. Couldn't watch her disappear back into the storm, hurt and terrified and alone. Sarah would have already had her inside, wrapped in blankets, pressing hot tea into her shaking hands. Sarah had never been able to pass suffering without trying to ease it. Can you stand? He asked Maya gently. She nodded, but when she tried to rise, her legs buckled. Ethan moved instinctively, catching her elbow to steady her. She flinched violently at his touch, jerking away so hard she nearly fell again. I'm sorry, he said immediately, holding his hands up. I'm sorry. I won't touch you. But you need to get out of this rain. You're hypothermic. Can you make it to the house if I walk beside you? Maya looked at him for a long moment, some terrible calculation happening behind those dark eyes. Finally, she nodded once. The journey to Ethan's house took 10 minutes, though it was less than 100 yards. Maya moved like every step caused pain, or perhaps like she expected the ground to give way beneath her feet at any moment. Grace walked on her other side, chattering softly about the piano recital, about her cat Mr. Whiskers, about anything and everything in that stream of consciousness way children had when they sensed tension and tried to fill the silence. When they reached the porch, Ethan unlocked the door and held it open. Maya stood at the threshold, shaking, staring into the warm, lit interior of the house like it might be a trap. It's okay, Grace said, already inside and pulling off her raincoat. We have towels and hot chocolate. Daddy makes really good hot chocolate. Maya's gaze moved from the interior to Ethan's face, searching for something, deception, threat, the catch that surely had to be coming. He tried to make his expression as open and non-threatening as possible, which was harder than it should have been when you were a 6'2" man with a naturally stern face. "Just to dry off and warm up," he said quietly. "Then we can figure out what to do. I promise, no one here will hurt you." She stepped inside like she was crossing into enemy territory. The house was everything Ethan and Sarah had dreamed of when they'd bought it 8 years ago. Open-plan living room and kitchen, warm wood floors, built-in bookshelves, framed photos on every surface documenting a life of love and loss. Maya's eyes moved over everything with the hypervigilance of someone who'd learned to catalog exits and weapons and potential dangers in every space. "Bathroom's down the hall," Ethan said, pointing. "There are clean towels in the cabinet. Take your time." Maya nodded but didn't move. She was leaving puddles on his floor, her whole body trembling so hard her teeth chattered audibly. "Grace, go get changed into your pajamas," Ethan said. "But now please." His daughter recognized the tone, the one that meant this wasn't up for debate. She gave Maya one last concerned look before disappearing up the stairs. Alone with the stranger, Ethan felt the weight of the decision he'd just made. He'd invited someone he knew nothing about into his home, the home he shared with his daughter. Sarah would have called it compassion. His mother would call it reckless stupidity. "Look," he said carefully, "I know you don't know me. I know you have no reason to trust me, but you're hurt and cold and clearly in trouble. Let me help, please." "Why?" The word came out raw, almost accusatory. "You don't know me. I could be anyone. I could be dangerous." "Are you?" The question seemed to surprise her. She blinked, water dripping from her hair into her eyes. "What? Are you dangerous? Are you going to hurt me or my daughter?" "No," she whispered. "No, I would never Then that's settled." Ethan moved toward the kitchen, deliberately turning his back to show he wasn't afraid of her. "Go take a hot shower before you catch pneumonia. There's a robe on the back of the bathroom door. I'll make something hot to drink." He heard her move finally, her wet shoes squelching on the hardwood as she crept down the hall. The bathroom door closed, and a moment later he heard the shower start. Ethan braced his hands on the kitchen counter and let out a long, shaky breath. What the hell had he just done? He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the emergency contacts. Should he call the police? But the way Maya had looked at him, the raw terror in her eyes, she was running from something, or someone. The bruise on her temple wasn't from a fall. Those weren't the eyes of a criminal. Those were the eyes of prey. "Daddy?" He turned to find Grace on the stairs, now in her flower print pajamas, Mr. Whiskers clutched under one arm. "You did the right thing," she said solemnly. "How do you know?" "Because that's what Mommy would have done." Grace descended the stairs and wrapped her arms around his waist. She looked like she forgot that nice people exist. We can remind her. Ethan hugged his daughter, marveling not for the first time at the wisdom that sometimes poured out of her. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just don't notice because you're busy being worried all the time." He laughed despite himself, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Go get your blanket from the couch. We'll set up the guest room while Maya's in the shower." They worked together, Grace chattering about which blankets were softest and whether they should put flowers from the garden in a vase on the nightstand. By the time they finished, the room looked almost welcoming. Clean sheets, extra pillows, a lamp turned on to banish the shadows. The shower was still running when they came back downstairs. Ethan put the kettle on and rummaged through the cabinets, searching for something stronger than tea. He found the box of fancy hot chocolate Sarah had bought for special occasions, the kind with real chocolate that you had to shave into hot milk. It had been sitting unused since her death, but this felt like the right time. Grace helped, standing on a stool to reach the mugs, picking out the prettiest one for their guest, the blue one with white flowers that had been Sarah's favorite. The shower shut off. Ethan heard the bathroom door open, footsteps in the hall. When Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway, she looked like a different person, clean, wrapped in the oversized terry cloth robe, her dark hair towel-dried and hanging loose around her face. Without the grime and rain and terror, he could see she was actually quite beautiful, with delicate features and large almond-shaped eyes. But the haunted look remained, along with fresh evidence of violence he hadn't noticed before. Finger-shaped bruises around her wrist, a cut on her lower lip that had scabbed over. "Sit," Ethan said, gesturing to the kitchen table. "Please?" She did, moving gingerly like everything hurt. Grace climbed into the chair beside her, Mr. Whiskers still in tow. "This is Mr. Whiskers," Grace announced, holding up the stuffed cat. "He's very good at making people feel better. You can hold him if you want." Maya stared at the offered toy like it was something precious and fragile. "I don't want to get him dirty." "You're not dirty anymore. You took a shower." Grace pressed Mr. Whiskers into Maya's hands with the insistence only a child could manage. Slowly, carefully, Maya's fingers closed around the worn plush toy. She held it against her chest, and Ethan saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. He brought over 3 mugs of hot chocolate and set the blue-flowered one in front of Maya. She cupped her hands around it but didn't drink, just absorbed the warmth through the ceramic. "Thank you," she whispered. I can't." Her voice broke. "You shouldn't be kind to me." "Why not?" Grace asked, with the blunt honesty of childhood. Maya's eyes filled with tears that she blinked back furiously. "Because bad things happen to people who are kind to me." The statement hung in the air, heavy with implications that made Ethan's protective instincts flare. He kept his voice calm, neutral. "Is someone looking for you, Maya?" She flinched at her name or at the question. After a long moment, she nodded. "Someone who hurt you?" Another nod, smaller this time. "A boyfriend? Husband?" Her laugh was bitter, broken. "Husband, though that word makes it sound too simple, too normal." She finally lifted the mug to her lips, taking a small sip. Her hand shook so badly the liquid sloshed. "He's very good at seeming normal, that's the problem." Ethan exchanged a glance with Grace, whose small face had gone very serious. His daughter had heard enough. She didn't need the details. "Grace, why don't you go get your book? You can read in the living room while the grown-ups talk." For once, Grace didn't argue. She slipped off the chair, but before she left, she turned back to Maya. "You're safe here," she said with absolute conviction. "My daddy is very strong, and he doesn't let bad things happen. Not anymore." After Grace left, taking Mr. Whiskers with her, the kitchen felt very quiet. Rain still drummed against the windows, but inside the silence stretched between them. "I shouldn't stay," Maya said finally. "It's not safe for you, for her. If he finds me here—" "Let's start with basics," Ethan interrupted gently. "When's the last time you ate?" She blinked at the question, clearly thrown by the change of subject. "I don't— 2 days ago, maybe? There was a diner. I had some money left." "Right." Ethan stood and moved to the refrigerator. "Then before we talk about anything else, you're going to eat something. You look like you're about to fall over." "I can't. You've already—" "I'm making eggs," he said, pulling out ingredients. "Scrambled okay? Toast? You're eating. That's not negotiable." He cooked while she sat in stunned silence, as if the simple act of someone taking care of her without demanding anything in return was completely foreign. Maybe it was. The thought made something hot and angry curl in Ethan's chest. He'd seen this before, in a way. One of his late wife's friends had left an abusive marriage, had shown up at their door with that same shell-shocked expression, that same inability to trust kindness. Sarah had taken her in without hesitation, had helped her find a lawyer, a new apartment, a fresh start. Ethan had watched his wife move through the world with that quiet, fierce determination to make things better, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. He'd never expected to be the one doing the protecting after she was gone. He set a plate of eggs and toast in front of Maya, along with fresh orange juice. She stared at it like he'd given her a feast instead of a simple meal. "Eat," he said softly. "We can talk after." She ate slowly at first, then faster, like her body remembered hunger all at once. Ethan busied himself cleaning up, giving her space, not watching her too obviously. When she finally pushed the empty plate away, some of the gray pallor had left her face. "Thank you," she said again, the words weighted with more than gratitude for food. Ethan sat down across from her, cradling his own mug. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" "You don't have to, but it might help to talk to someone." Maya was quiet for so long he thought she might refuse. Then, haltingly, she began to speak. His name is Richard Brennan. Dr. Richard Brennan. He's a psychiatrist, well known, respected. We met 4 years ago at a charity fundraiser. I was working as an event coordinator. He was charming, successful, attentive, everything I thought I wanted. Her voice went flat, reciting facts like they'd happened to someone else. We got married 10 months later, small wedding. He said he wanted it to be intimate, just us, no big fuss. I thought it was romantic. Now I know he was isolating me from the start. Ethan said nothing, just listened, his hands wrapped around his cooling mug. It started small, Maya continued. Comments about my friends, how they were a bad influence, how they didn't understand our relationship. Concerns about my job, how stressful it was, how maybe I should consider something less demanding. He was so gentle about it, so caring. He made it sound like he was worried about me, looking out for me. She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. I quit my job, lost touch with my friends, moved into his house in Fairfield, and then the real rules started. Rules? Everything had to be exactly right. Dinner at 7, house spotless. My clothes, my hair, my makeup, all had to meet his standards. When I failed, and I always failed, because the standards would change without warning, there would be consequences. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her wrist, to those finger-shaped bruises. At first it was just emotional. He'd give me the silent treatment for days, make me sleep in the guest room, tell me how disappointed he was, how I was letting him down. Then it escalated. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. He hit you? Sometimes, but that wasn't... She struggled for words. Physical violence was almost easier because at least I could see the evidence, could name what was happening. But Richard was too smart for that to be his primary tool. He used his profession against me, started telling me I was having episodes, that I was mentally unstable. He'd give me pills, said they were for anxiety, depression. They made me foggy, disconnected. I'd lose time, wake up with no memory of the day before. Jesus Christ, Ethan breathed. He isolated me completely. I had no access to money, no phone except the one he monitored, no internet, no car. He told his colleagues and neighbors that I was fragile, that I was ill, that he was caring for me. Made himself look like a devoted husband and me look like a burden. And the worst part is, her voice cracked, I started to believe him, started to think maybe I was crazy, maybe I was difficult and ungrateful and sick. He gaslighted me so thoroughly I couldn't trust my own perception of reality. Ethan had heard about this kind of abuse, the psychological torture that left no visible scars but destroyed someone from the inside out. Hearing it laid out in Maya's quiet, defeated voice made him want to find this Richard Brennan and show him exactly what consequences felt like. How did you get away? He asked instead. 3 days ago. I hadn't taken my pills. I'd been pretending to, hiding them under my tongue and spitting them out later. The fog started to clear and I remembered who I used to be before him. And I got scared, really scared, because I realized if I stayed, I was going to die. Maybe not physically, but the person I was would be completely gone. She took a shaky breath. He left for a conference, 2 nights away. I had a window. I broke into his office, found cash, documents, found a burner phone I'd hidden months ago during a moment of clarity. And I ran. Didn't pack a bag, didn't leave a note, just ran. For 3 days you've been running? She nodded. I was afraid to stay in one place, afraid he'd somehow track me. He has connections, resources. I dumped my phone after the first day. He'd have been able to trace it. Stayed off cameras as much as possible. But I haven't slept more than a few hours, haven't eaten right. I'm exhausted and I know I can't keep running forever, but I don't know what else to do. The words tumbled out faster now, tinged with desperation. I can't go to the police. Richard knows everyone. He'd convince them I'm delusional, that I'm having a breakdown. He'd have me committed to some facility and I'd never get out. I can't go to friends or family. He'd find me immediately. I have nothing. I am nothing. I'm just... Stop. Ethan's voice cut through her spiral. You're not nothing. You're a survivor. You got away from him. That took incredible courage. Courage, she repeated bitterly. I'm sitting in a stranger's kitchen wearing his robe because I literally threw myself in front of his car. That's not courage. That's desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. They sat in silence, the weight of Maya's story settling over them. From the living room came the soft sound of Grace humming to herself, a reminder that innocence still existed in the world even when everything else seemed dark. "You can stay here tonight," Ethan said finally. "Tomorrow, when you've rested, we can figure out next steps. But you're not going back out into that storm, and you're not running anymore tonight." "I can't." "Yes, you can. Guest room's ready. Door has a lock on the inside if that makes you feel safer. Stay. Rest. We'll deal with everything else in the morning." Maya looked at him with those haunted eyes, and he could see the war happening inside her, the instinct to flee, battling with the desperate need to stop running, to rest, to trust just one more time. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "You don't know me. I could be lying. This could all be—" "I don't think you're lying." He kept his voice level, certain. "I think you're terrified and exhausted, and you need help. If our positions were reversed, if Grace and I needed help, I'd hope someone would be kind enough to offer it." Something in her expression broke, the last of her defenses crumbling. She nodded once, a tiny movement. "Okay," she breathed, "just for tonight, and then I'll go." But Ethan, watching her cradle the empty mug like a lifeline, suspected that one night was going to turn into something much more complicated. He'd opened his door to a stranger in the rain, and in doing so, had pulled a thread that was going to unravel both their lives. He just didn't know yet how much. Morning came too quickly, pale November light filtering through curtains that Maya hadn't remembered closing. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was, only that the bed was soft, the sheets clean, and nothing hurt except the deep, bone-weary ache of exhaustion that 3 days of running had carved into her body. Then memory crashed back. The rain, the headlights, the man and his daughter who'd taken her in despite every reason not to. She sat up slowly, her hand instinctively going to the door, still locked from the inside just as she'd left it. Through the window she could see a backyard stretching toward a line of trees, their branches mostly bare. A garden plot sat abandoned near the fence, filled with the brown remains of what might have been flowers months ago. Everything looked normal, peaceful, safe, which only made her more anxious. Safety was an illusion. She'd learned that the hard way. The smell of coffee drifted under the door, followed by the lighter scent of something baking. Her stomach clenched with hunger despite the meal from last night. She found her clothes washed and folded on the chair by the window. When had that happened? And dressed quickly, her hands shaking only slightly as she pulled on jeans still damp around the seams. She needed to leave. That had been the deal. One night, then back to running. Except she had nowhere to run to, no plan beyond putting distance between herself and Richard. The money she'd taken from his office wouldn't last long. Eventually, she'd run out of road and options. But first, coffee. And maybe she owed Ethan a proper goodbye. A real thank you for risking his safety and his daughter's safety for a woman whose story he had no reason to believe. Maya unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway, following the sounds of domestic mourning. Voices drifted from the kitchen. Grace's high chatter and Ethan's deeper responses, the easy rhythm of a father and daughter who knew each other's patterns. And then Mrs. Chen said my dynamics were improving, which means I'm playing louder and softer in the right places, Grace was saying. She thinks I should try the competition piece early. Do you think I'm ready? I think Mrs. Chen knows what she's talking about, Ethan replied. But it's your choice, sweetheart. Competitions can be stressful. Everything's stressful if you think about it too much. That's what you always say when you're working late. Do I? There was amusement in his voice. I'm going to stop saying that before you get too wise. Too late. Maya hovered at the kitchen entrance, suddenly uncertain. They looked so complete, the two of them, Ethan at the stove flipping what looked like pancakes, Grace perched on a stool at the counter with a glass of orange juice, still in her pajamas, her dark curls wild with sleep. A normal Saturday morning. She didn't belong in this picture. Grace noticed her first. Maya, you're awake. Daddy's making his special pancakes. They're really good, I promise. Not like the ones from the box. Ethan turned, spatula in hand, and Maya felt the weight of his assessment. He looked tired, she realized, shadows under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept well either. Because of her. Because he'd taken in a stranger and probably spent the night wondering if he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Morning, he said evenly. Coffee? I should go, Maya said instead of answering. I've imposed enough. Thank you for everything, for last night. But I need to sit down and have breakfast first. It wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't a suggestion either. You can't run on an empty stomach. Trust me, I tried that once in college. Ended up passing out in the library. You never told me that story, Grace said, delighted by this revelation. Because it's embarrassing. Ethan pointed the spatula at the empty stool next to Grace. Sit, eat. Then we'll talk about what comes next. Maya wanted to refuse, to bolt for the door and disappear before she brought more trouble into their lives. But her legs felt weak, her resolve weaker, and the smell of those pancakes made her mouth water. Slowly, she crossed to the stool and sat, keeping space between herself and Grace, hyper-aware of her own presence as an intrusion. Ethan poured her coffee without asking how she took it, black as it turned out, which was fine because she'd learned to drink whatever was available. He set a plate of pancakes in front of her, golden and perfect, with butter melting into pools. Blueberries or chocolate chips? Grace asked. Daddy always asks, but I always pick chocolate chips. Blueberries are fine, Maya said quietly. Ethan sprinkled blueberries onto her pancakes with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, probably for his daughter, probably for his wife before she died. The casual domesticity of it made Maya's throat tight. They ate in relative silence, Grace filling the quiet spaces with chatter about school and piano and her cat Mr. Whiskers, who was apparently very talented at catching toy mice but refused to acknowledge real mice in the garage. Ethan listened with the attentiveness of a parent who genuinely cared about his child's world, asking questions, making gentle jokes that made Grace giggle. Maya picked at her food, managing about half the pancakes before her stomach protested. She'd shrunk it over the past few months, eating only what Richard allowed, and now her body rebelled against abundance. When Grace finished, she hopped off the stool and announced she was going to get dressed. Because Miss Sarah, that's Daddy's friend who checks on us sometimes, is coming over later, and she says I should always be dressed before noon on weekends, even though I don't see why it matters. After she disappeared upstairs, the kitchen felt very quiet. Ethan cleared plates, his movements efficient but not rushed. Maya stood to help, but he waved her off. Let's go to the living room, he said, more comfortable for conversation. The living room was full of evidence of the life Ethan had built, photos on every surface, books overflowing the built-in shelves, Grace's piano sheet music scattered on the coffee table. Maya's eyes caught on a large framed photo above the fireplace. Ethan, younger and laughing, with his arms around a beautiful black woman who glowed with happiness. Grace, maybe 5 years old, sat on the woman's lap, all three of them looking at the camera like they couldn't believe their own joy. My wife, Sarah, Ethan said softly, following her gaze. She died 3 years ago, car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light. I'm sorry, Maya whispered, the words inadequate. Me too. He settled into an armchair and gestured for her to take the couch. She would have done exactly what I did last night. Probably would have done it better, honestly. Sarah never met a person in need she could walk past. Maya sat on the edge of the couch, perched like she might need to run. You said we'd talk about next steps. I appreciate everything you've done, but I can't stay. It's not safe for you or Grace. Let's define safe, Ethan said. This man, your husband, does he know you're in Connecticut? I don't know. I don't think so. I was careful. But Richard is smart. He thinks 10 steps ahead. He could be tracking me in ways I haven't even considered. Does he have connections to Riverside specifically? Maya shook her head. Not that I know of. We lived in Fairfield. His practice is in New Haven, but he has colleagues everywhere, people who respect him. If he circulates my photo, says I'm mentally ill and dangerous to myself. She couldn't finish the sentence. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. I want to help you. Really help you. Not just give you one night and send you back out there. You can't. Please let me finish. His voice was gentle but firm. I'm not a wealthy man by any means, but I'm comfortable. I own my own business. Landscape architecture and design. I work from home most days, manage a small crew. What I'm saying is, I have resources, flexibility, and I have space. He gestured around the house. More space than Grace and I need. Maya stared at him. You're offering to let me stay? I'm offering you time. Time to rest, to figure out a real plan, somewhere safe to land while you get your feet under you. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. Look, I'm not naive. I know you're in real danger. I know this is complicated and scary and there are no easy answers. But you running yourself into the ground, sleeping in bus stations or cheap motels, looking over your shoulder every second, that's not sustainable. You'll make mistakes when you're exhausted. You'll be more vulnerable, not less. But Grace is tougher than she looks, and she already likes you, which is saying something. Grace doesn't warm up to people easily, not since Sarah died. Ethan's voice softened. This house has been very quiet for 3 years. Maybe some noise would be good for us. Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes and blinked them back furiously. Why would you do this? You don't know me. I could be... What if I'm lying? What if Richard is the victim and I'm the abuser? Are you? No. Then stop trying to talk me out of helping you. He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer. Sarah used to say I had a hero complex. Maybe she was right. Or maybe I'm just a father who understands that the world is dangerous and people need to look out for each other, especially people who can't look out for themselves right now. I don't need... Maya stopped, swallowing the automatic denial. It was a lie anyway. She needed help desperately. What would you want in return? Ethan looked genuinely puzzled. In return? Nothing's free. There's always a price. Richard had taught her that. Every kindness came with strings attached, conditions that would strangle you eventually. Understanding crossed Ethan's face, followed by something that looked like sadness. No price, Maya. No conditions. You stay as long as you need to. When you're ready to figure out your next steps, we'll help you do that. In the meantime, you rest, you heal, and you're safe. That's it. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But Maya was so tired, tired of running, tired of fear, tired of carrying the weight of survival alone. What if just this once she let someone help? What if Ethan meant exactly what he said? I don't understand you, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to understand me. You just have to trust me enough to stay. Before Maya could respond, Grace thundered down the stairs, now dressed in jeans and a purple sweater. Are you staying? She asked Maya directly, with that child's ability to cut straight to the heart of things. Maya looked at Ethan, then at Grace's hopeful face, then at the photos on the walls that documented a family built on love and shattered by loss but still standing. She thought about the garden she'd seen from her window that morning, abandoned but not dead, waiting for someone to tend it again. Just for a little while, she heard herself say, until I figure things out. Grace's face split into a brilliant smile. Good, because I already asked Daddy if you could help me with the garden in spring. He's terrible at flowers. Everything he plants dies. That's not entirely true, Ethan protested. Some things merely wilt dramatically. Same thing, Grace turned back to Maya. Do you know about gardens? Maya thought about the small balcony garden she'd kept in her first apartment, before Richard, before everything. Tomatoes and herbs and cheerful pansies that had made her happy for one summer. A little, she admitted. Perfect. Then you can teach me and we'll teach Daddy, and maybe this year things won't die. Grace said this with the utmost seriousness, as if the survival of plants was a matter of grave importance. Maybe, Maya agreed, and felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking but beginning tentatively to heal. The rest of the morning passed in a strange, surreal domesticity. Ethan showed Maya around the house properly, pointing out where things were kept, insisting she treat the space as her own. The guest room would be hers as long as she needed it. There was a desk if she wanted privacy. Bathroom down the hall. Help yourself to anything in the kitchen. Please don't feel like you need to hide in your room. The words washed over her like a foreign language she was only beginning to understand. Around noon, a woman arrived, Miss Sarah, though Ethan introduced her as Sarah Chen, his late wife's best friend and Grace's piano teacher. She was petite and sharp-eyed, with silver streaking her black hair and the assessing gaze of someone who missed nothing. So you're the mystery woman from last night, Sarah said when Ethan introduced Maya, her tone neutral but not unfriendly. Grace called me this morning very excited about the new guest. Maya tensed, waiting for suspicion, for questions she couldn't answer. But Sarah just smiled and said, "Any friend of Grace's is welcome here. Though I should warn you, she'll talk your ear off about piano if you let her." "I don't mind," Maya said softly. Sarah stayed for lunch, sandwiches that Ethan assembled with the same casual efficiency he brought to everything. She and Ethan talked about Grace's progress, about an upcoming recital, about the logistics of Ethan's week. Normal conversation between old friends who'd helped each other survive grief. Maya sat quietly, eating little, feeling like an anthropologist observing a culture she'd forgotten existed. At one point, Sarah excused herself to use the bathroom, and Ethan leaned toward Maya. "She knows something's wrong. She won't push. But if you want to talk to another woman about any of this, Sarah's trustworthy. She's also a lawyer, corporate law, not criminal, but she has connections if you need legal help." Maya nodded, filing the information away. She wasn't ready to trust anyone else yet, but knowing the option existed felt like a small lifeline. After Sarah left, Grace wanted to show Maya her piano practice. They sat together on the bench while Grace played through a Chopin nocturne, her small fingers stumbling occasionally, but capturing something beautiful nonetheless. Maya found herself relaxing, the music washing away some of the constant vigilance. "You're really good," she told Grace when the last notes faded. "I mess up the middle part every time." "The middle part is hard, but the feeling is there. That's what matters." Grace looked at her seriously. "Daddy says Mommy used to say the same thing, that feeling matters more than perfect notes." "Your mommy was right." They sat together in comfortable silence, and Maya realized with a start that she hadn't thought about Richard in over an hour. Hadn't checked the door, hadn't calculated escape routes, hadn't felt the familiar clench of fear in her gut. For 1 hour, she'd been almost normal. The peace lasted until evening. Maya was helping Ethan with dinner, or trying to, though he mostly waved her away from actual cooking and gave her simple tasks like setting the table. Grace was upstairs doing homework. The kitchen was warm and full of the smell of roasting chicken when Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it and frowned. "That's odd." "What?" "News alert. Missing person case in Fairfield." He picked up the phone, his frown deepening as he read. Then his eyes flicked to Maya. "Is your last name Brennan?" The blood drained from Maya's face. She gripped the edge of the counter to keep from swaying. "What does it say?" Ethan turned the phone toward her. The headline read, "Prominent psychiatrist seeks help finding missing wife." Below it was a photo, her photo, taken maybe 2 years ago at some event. She was smiling in the picture, wearing a dress Richard had chosen, looking happy and stable and completely unlike the terrified woman who'd thrown herself in front of a car 3 nights ago. Her hands shook as she took the phone and read the article. Richard's statement painted her as mentally fragile, off her medications, potentially a danger to herself. He was devastated and desperate to bring her home safely. The article mentioned his stellar reputation, his work with trauma victims, his dedication to mental health advocacy. It made him sound like a saint and her like a tragedy waiting to happen. "That's not..." Maya's voice came out strangled. "He's lying. I don't need medications. I need to be away from him. He's the one who..." She couldn't finish, couldn't breathe, the walls closing in as panic seized her chest. "Hey! Hey!" Ethan's voice cut through the spiral. "Maya, look at me. Breathe, just breathe." She tried, gasping air that wouldn't seem to fill her lungs. This was it. Richard had mobilized his resources, his connections, his carefully constructed image. He'd made her the villain and himself the concerned hero. Anyone who saw that article would believe him. She was going to be found, dragged back, and this time Richard wouldn't make the mistake of leaving her unsupervised for 2 days. "I have to go," she managed. "I have to leave now, before someone recognizes me, before he finds me here. You and Grace, you'll be in danger if I stay." "Nobody's going anywhere." Ethan's hands hovered near her shoulders but didn't touch, respecting her space even in crisis. "Listen to me. This article came out today. It's Saturday evening. Most people aren't glued to the news. And you look different now than in that photo. No makeup, different hair, different clothes. The chances of someone in Riverside recognizing you are slim. But not zero. No, not zero." He acknowledged this honestly. "But running right now in a panic with no plan? That's more dangerous. You'll make mistakes. Maya's mind raced, trying to calculate odds and options. She had maybe $300 left, no ID that wasn't in her real name, no car. Nowhere to go that Richard wouldn't think to look eventually. Ethan was right. Running blind would get her caught faster. What do I do? The question came out broken, desperate. Ethan was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, we need to talk to Sarah. She'll know what legal options you have. In the meantime, you stay inside, stay off camera, and we figure out a real plan. Not just running, but actually protecting yourself. He'll find me, Maya whispered. He always finds a way. Not this time. There was steel in Ethan's voice now, a determination that reminded Maya he'd survived his own kind of loss and come out fighting. This time, you have people in your corner, people who believe you. That changes things. Did it? Maya wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that having allies would make a difference. But Richard was so good at manipulating people, at making them doubt their own perceptions. How long before he convinced Ethan that she was the unstable one? How long before the same kindness that had sheltered her became the weapon Richard used to drag her back? Footsteps on the stairs announced Grace's return. She bounded into the kitchen, then stopped when she saw Maya's face. What's wrong? Nothing, sweetheart, Ethan said quickly. Just some grown-up stuff. Why don't you go wash up for dinner? But Grace ignored him, crossing to Maya instead. She reached out and took Maya's shaking hand in both of hers, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. You're scared again, Grace said simply. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. The bad person is looking for you. Another nod. Grace looked at her father. We're not going to let him find her, right? Right, Ethan confirmed. Good. Grace turned back to Maya. See? You're safe here. Daddy promised, and he keeps promises. Always. She squeezed Maya's hand once more, then headed toward the bathroom as if the matter was settled. Out of the mouths of babes, Maya thought, feeling something loosen in her chest. Grace's absolute certainty in her father's ability to protect them was either naive or prophetic. Maya didn't know which, but she found herself wanting desperately to believe in it. Okay, she said quietly to Ethan. Okay, I'll stay. For now. But the second I think I'm putting you and Grace in danger... We'll deal with that if it happens, Ethan interrupted. Let me call Sarah. She should know about this. He stepped into the hallway to make the call, leaving Maya alone in the kitchen with the roasting chicken and the news alert still glowing on his phone. She picked it up, forcing herself to read the article again, to see herself through Richard's eyes. Fragile, unstable, in need of rescue. She'd believed those things about herself for so long that seeing them in print still carried a terrible weight of possibility. What if Richard was right? What if she was broken beyond repair? But no. That was his voice in her head. His gaslighting made so much a part of her internal dialogue she couldn't separate truth from manipulation anymore. She wasn't broken. She was traumatized. There was a difference. Ethan returned a few minutes later. Sarah's coming over after dinner. She wants to hear your full story, everything you can remember about Richard's abuse, the timeline, any documentation you might have. She thinks there might be legal recourse, but we need to build a case. A case? Maya tested the words. You mean fight back? I mean stop running and start pushing back. There's a difference between fleeing and protecting yourself. The idea was terrifying and intoxicating in equal measure. For so long, her only strategy had been escape, disappearance, making herself small and invisible. The thought of actually confronting Richard, of using the legal system against him, it felt impossible. He had money, reputation, connections. What did she have? But maybe that wasn't the right question. Maybe the question was, what would she have if she kept letting fear control her choices? Dinner was quiet, tension humming under the surface of normal conversation. Grace chattered about her homework, about the science project due next month, about her friend Emma's birthday party next weekend. Maya picked at her food, her appetite gone, but forced herself to eat because Ethan was right. She needed to keep her strength up. After dinner, Grace retreated to the living room to read while the adults cleared the table. Maya washed dishes mechanically, her mind elsewhere, running through worst-case scenarios. What if Richard showed up at the door right now? What if he'd already traced her somehow? What if... Stop, Ethan said softly beside her. I can hear you catastrophizing from here. I'm just being realistic. There's a difference between realistic and drowning in what-ifs. He took the plate from her hands and set it in the dish rack. One step at a time. Sarah will be here soon. We'll talk through options. We'll make a plan. You're not alone in this. Those last words threatened to undo her. Maya had been alone for so long, even in her marriage, especially in her marriage, that the concept of partnership, of shared burden, felt like fantasy. Sarah arrived an hour later carrying a leather portfolio and the no-nonsense air of someone ready to work. Grace was sent upstairs to read in her room, despite her protests that she was almost 9 and basically an adult. Once they were alone in the living room, Sarah opened her portfolio and pulled out a legal pad. Tell me everything, she said to Maya. Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out, even if it seems small or irrelevant. I need the full picture. So Maya told her story again, this time in more detail, with Sarah interrupting occasionally to ask clarifying questions. What exactly had Richard said? What medications had he claimed to prescribe? Did she have any proof of the abuse? Any witnesses? Any digital trail? I have some of his files, Maya said quietly. Documents I took from his office when I ran. Patient records, financial statements. I didn't really look at them. I just grabbed what I could carry and ran. Sarah's eyes sharpened. Where are these documents now? In a storage locker. I rented it the first day before I dumped my phone, paid cash for 3 months. I couldn't carry everything, and I thought, I don't know what I thought, that maybe they'd be useful somehow. They might be very useful, Sarah said, especially if there are any irregularities in how he treated patients or managed his practice. But we need to be careful. Those documents could also be considered stolen property. I didn't steal them. I took what belonged to me. Records of my own treatment, our joint financial statements. The patient files were in the same drawer. I grabbed everything. Sarah made notes, her pen moving rapidly. Okay, here's what I'm thinking. First, we need to establish that you're of sound mind and that Richard's claims about your mental instability are false. That means getting you evaluated by an independent psychiatrist, someone with no connection to Richard. Second, we need to document your injuries, both current and past. Do you have photos of any bruises or injuries? Maya shook her head. He was careful. He mostly left marks where they wouldn't show or where they could be explained as accidents. The psychological abuse was worse anyway. The fear, the control, the constant gaslighting. Psychological abuse is harder to prove but not impossible, especially with expert testimony. Third, we need to figure out if Richard has committed any crimes we can actually prosecute. Medical malpractice, fraud, assault, anything we can build a case around. What about a restraining order? Ethan asked. Sarah grimaced. Restraining orders are tricky. She'd have to file in court, which means revealing where she is. And given Richard's standing in the community, there's a real risk the judge would side with him, especially with this missing person report positioning him as the concerned husband and Maya as mentally unstable. We need more ammunition before we go that route. Maya felt hope withering before it had fully bloomed. So what can I do? Just hide and hope he doesn't find me? No. Sarah's voice was firm. You build your case methodically. You get that psychiatric evaluation. You retrieve those documents and we go through them with a fine-tooth comb. You work with a therapist who specializes in abuse and can testify to the patterns you're describing, and you stay safe while we build leverage. How long will that take? Weeks, maybe months. I won't lie to you, Maya. This is going to be a long fight. Richard has resources and reputation. We need to be smarter and more prepared than he is. Months. Maya felt the weight of that timeline settle on her shoulders. Months of hiding, of looking over her shoulder, of living in fear that every knock on the door might be him. I can't ask you to do all this, she said to Ethan. Letting me stay here for weeks or months, getting involved in my mess, it's too much. That's not your decision to make, Ethan replied. It's mine, and I'm choosing to help. End of discussion. Sarah smiled slightly. He's stubborn. You'll get used to it. His wife used to complain about it all the time. Did not, Ethan protested. She absolutely did. I have text messages to prove it. Sarah turned back to Maya. Here's what I need from you. First, the location of that storage unit. I'll have someone retrieve the documents safely, someone who can't be traced back to you or Ethan. Second, I need you to write down everything you can remember about the abuse. Dates, incidents, what was said, what was done. Every detail, no matter how small. Third, I'll set up appointments with a psychiatrist and a therapist. Both will need to evaluate you independently. What if... Maya hesitated. What if they think Richard's right? What if I really am unstable? Sarah reached across the coffee table and put her hand over Maya's. You're not unstable. You're traumatized. There's a huge difference, and any competent mental health professional will see that. But I understand your fear. It's valid. Richard spent years convincing you that you couldn't trust your own mind. That's what abusers do. They make you doubt reality itself. Maya nodded, her throat tight. Having someone validate her experience, someone besides Ethan who believed her without question, it was overwhelming. They talked for another hour, Sarah outlining strategy and next steps, Maya answering questions as best she could. By the time Sarah left, promising to start making calls first thing Monday morning, Maya felt simultaneously hopeful and terrified. This was real. They were actually going to fight Richard, to try to bring him down. The audacity of it made her dizzy. After Sarah drove away, Ethan found Maya standing in the darkened living room, staring out the window at nothing. You okay? He asked quietly. I don't know. Ask me again in a few weeks. Fair enough. He stood beside her, not touching, but present. For what it's worth, I think you're incredibly brave. I don't feel brave. I feel like I'm about to throw up. Also fair. He smiled in the darkness. Courage isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid and doing the thing anyway. You've been doing that for days now. Give yourself some credit. Maya wanted to believe him, wanted to see herself as brave instead of broken. Maybe if she pretended long enough, it would become true. Thank you, she said finally, for everything. I know I keep saying that, but I don't know what else to say. You've saved my life. Both of you, you and Grace. Grace would tell you that you're saving yourself. We're just providing the space for it to happen. Upstairs, they could hear Grace moving around, getting ready for bed. Normal sounds of normal life. Maya had forgotten what normal felt like. I should get some sleep, she said. Big day tomorrow, apparently. Writing everything down won't be easy, Ethan warned. Reliving it all. Make sure you take breaks. Don't push yourself too hard. She nodded and turned toward the hallway, then stopped. Ethan, why did Sarah call your wife by her name? I thought Grace called her Miss Sarah. That's Sarah Chen, different Sarah. My wife was Sarah Walker. Sarah Chen took over Grace's piano lessons after Sarah died, and Grace started calling her Miss Sarah to avoid confusion. I know, it's confusing. Your wife taught piano? Among other things, she was a teacher, music and arts at the elementary school. She had this gift for making kids feel seen, like they mattered. His voice went soft with memory. Grace has her mother's hands, same long fingers, same natural rhythm. She's lucky to have you, Maya said, to have a father who keeps her mother's memory alive like that. We're lucky to have each other. He met her eyes in the dimness. And now maybe you're part of that luck too, even if you don't feel it yet. Maya didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and escaped to her room. Once inside with the door locked, she sat on the bed and pulled out the small notebook Ethan had given her, one of Grace's old-school notebooks, barely used, with cartoon cats on the cover. She opened to the first page and stared at the blank lines. Write it all down, Sarah had said. Every detail, every incident, every moment Richard had made her feel small and powerless and insane. Where did she even start? The first time she'd felt afraid of him, maybe. It had been 6 months into the marriage. She'd come home from work late, traffic had been terrible, and found him sitting in the dark living room, just sitting, waiting. When she'd turned on the light, he'd looked at her with such cold displeasure that her stomach had dropped. You're late, he'd said. I called. I left a message. I worry about you out there alone. The world is dangerous for women like you. Women like you. She hadn't understood the insult buried in that phrase until much later. Maya started writing, her hand shaking at first, then steadying as the words poured out. The notebook filled page after page, incidents she'd forced herself to forget, dismissals and put-downs and moments of casual cruelty that had seemed almost loving at the time. The way he'd isolated her from friends by pointing out their flaws until she couldn't see them anymore. The way he'd controlled their finances, giving her an allowance like she was a child. The way he'd monitored her phone, her email, her every move, always framed as concern for her well-being. The physical violence came later in the timeline, slaps that came out of nowhere, justified as waking her up from her episodes. The time he'd grabbed her wrist so hard it bruised when she'd tried to leave an argument. The night he'd pushed her down the stairs and then convinced her she'd fallen because she was unsteady from the medications he was giving her. She wrote until her hand cramped and her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. This was her testimony, her truth. Richard had tried to erase her, to remake her into his image of an ideal wife. But she was still here, still remembering, still fighting. When she finally set the notebook aside, it was after midnight. 40 pages filled with her careful handwriting, documenting 4 years of psychological torture. Maya lay back on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling, exhausted but unable to sleep. In 3 days, her life had transformed from desperate flight to something she couldn't quite name yet. Not safety, it was too soon for that. But maybe the possibility of safety. Maybe the first tentative roots of hope. Outside, rain began to fall again, gentler this time. Not the angry storm that had driven her into Ethan's headlights, but a soft, steady rhythm against the window. Maya listened to it until her eyes finally drifted closed, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she slept without nightmares. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange rhythm of normalcy, punctuated by moments of stark terror. Maya learned the patterns of Ethan's household. Breakfast at 7:30, Grace's online math tutoring at 9, lunch together when Ethan wasn't meeting with clients, afternoons filled with Grace's homework and piano practice, and the comfortable chaos of a child being a child. She learned that Ethan took his coffee black and strong, that Grace would eat anything except mushrooms, that the hot water took 2 minutes to reach the upstairs bathroom, that Wednesdays meant garbage collection, and Fridays meant Grace's piano lesson with Miss Sarah Chen. She also learned to navigate the constant undercurrent of fear that Richard might appear at any moment. Every car that slowed on the street made her freeze. Every unexpected knock sent her heart racing. She kept away from windows during daylight hours, declined Ethan's invitations to run errands, stayed inside like a ghost haunting someone else's life. Sarah Chen worked quickly, her lawyer's mind cutting through the complexity of Maya's situation with surgical precision. By the end of the first week, she'd arranged an appointment with Dr. Patricia Morrison, a psychiatrist who specialized in trauma and had testified in abuse cases before. The appointment was scheduled for the following Monday at an office 40 minutes away in a different town, somewhere Richard's network was less likely to reach. Maya spent Sunday night barely sleeping, terror coiling in her stomach at the thought of being evaluated, judged, found wanting. What if Dr. Morrison saw what Richard had seen: instability, weakness, someone fundamentally broken? What if the years of gaslighting had actually fractured something essential in her mind? Monday morning arrived cold and gray, November asserting its authority over Connecticut, with frost on the grass and breath visible in the air. Ethan had arranged for Grace to spend the day with Miss Sarah, taking her to school in the morning and picking her up in the afternoon. He'd taken the entire day off work to drive Maya to her appointment. "You don't have to do this," Maya said for the 3rd time as they prepared to leave. She stood in the kitchen wearing clothes Sarah Chen had brought her, professional but comfortable, nothing like the designer pieces Richard had always chosen. "You have work. I can take a bus or—" "Maya." Ethan's voice was gentle but firm as he shrugged into his jacket. "Stop trying to do everything alone. I'm driving you. End of discussion." They drove in comfortable silence for the first 20 minutes, the landscape sliding past in shades of brown and gray. Maya watched the world through the window, cataloging landmarks she might need if she had to run again. The gas station at the highway entrance, the distinctive red barn, the shopping center with its sprawling parking lot. Old habits died hard. "Tell me about your business," she said finally, needing distraction from her spiraling thoughts. Ethan glanced over, seeming surprised by the question. "My business?" "Landscape architecture. You said you design gardens and outdoor spaces. What's that like? He was quiet for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. I fell into it, honestly. I was studying architecture in college, but I kept getting drawn to the outdoor elements. How spaces flow, how plants interact with built structures, how you can create these pockets of peace in the middle of chaos. Sarah used to joke that I couldn't design a building to save my life, but I could make a parking lot beautiful. Was she right? Completely. He smiled at the memory. After we got married, I switched my focus, started my own company. Small at first, residential work, backyard makeovers, that kind of thing. But I loved it. There's something about working with living things, watching a space transform over seasons. Every garden tells a story if you know how to read it. What story does your garden tell, Payad? Maya asked, thinking of the abandoned plot she'd seen from her window. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That one tells a story about grief and neglect. Sarah planted it the year before she died. Roses, lavender, black-eyed Susans, all these flowers that she loved. After the accident, I tried to maintain it, but everything reminded me of her. Eventually, I just let it go. Easier to let things die than to keep fighting. The rawness in his voice made Maya's chest ache. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's been 3 years. I'm supposed to be past it by now, right? That's what everyone says. That grief has a timeline, and I should be moving on. Grief doesn't work that way, Maya said quietly. It's not linear. It's not something you get over. You just learn to carry it differently. He looked at her, really looked like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. How did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just someone who knows about losing things. She turned back to the window. Richard took so much from me. My confidence, my independence, my sense of self. But in some ways, I lost myself before I even met him. I was so eager to be loved, to be chosen, that I ignored every red flag. I participated in my own destruction. Maya, that's not how abuse works. You didn't participate in anything. He manipulated you. There's a difference between being vulnerable and being complicit. I know that intellectually, but knowing something and believing it are different things. That's what I'm hoping Dr. Morrison will help with, separating Richard's voice from my own. They arrived at the medical building with 15 minutes to spare. It was a nondescript brick structure in a quiet office park, the kind of place designed to be forgettable. Ethan parked and turned to face her. Do you want me to come in with you? Maya shook her head. I need to do this part alone, but thank you. For driving, for waiting, for all of it. I'll be right here, he promised. Take as long as you need. Dr. Patricia Morrison's office was on the 3rd floor, decorated in soothing blues and grays with abstract art on the walls and a water feature bubbling quietly in the corner. The psychiatrist herself was in her 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and an air of calm competence that immediately put Maya at ease. Maya, she said, rising to shake hands. I'm Patricia. Please sit wherever you're comfortable. Maya chose the armchair farthest from the door, then second-guessed herself. Was that significant? Would Dr. Morrison read something pathological into the choice? She forced herself to breathe, to remember what Sarah Chen had told her. This woman was here to help, not to judge. Sarah Chen has briefed me on your situation, Dr. Morrison began, settling into her own chair with a notepad. But I'd like to hear it from you, in your own words. Tell me about your relationship with Richard Brennan. So Maya told her story for the 3rd time, each retelling making it feel both more real and more surreal. Dr. Morrison listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes, her expression neutral but attentive. When Maya finished, her throat raw from talking, the psychiatrist was quiet for a long moment. What you've described is textbook coercive control, Dr. Morrison said finally. The isolation, the gaslighting, the intermittent reinforcement of affection and abuse, the use of his professional authority to undermine your reality, these are all classic tactics used by intimate partner abusers, particularly those in positions of power. So I'm not crazy? The question came out small, childlike. You're not crazy. You're traumatized. You've been subjected to sustained psychological warfare designed to break down your sense of self. The fact that you managed to escape, that you're sitting here having this conversation, that takes enormous strength. Maya felt tears burning and blinked them back. He gave me pills. He said they were for anxiety and depression. I don't know what they actually were. Do you remember what they looked like? Color, shape, any markings? Maya described them as best she could. Dr. Morrison made notes, frowning. I'd need to see the actual pills to be certain, but based on your description, they could be benzodiazepines or possibly antipsychotics. Both can cause the cognitive fog and memory issues you described, especially if administered inappropriately or in excessive doses. What he did, giving you medication without proper diagnosis or monitoring, that's medical malpractice at minimum, potentially criminal. Can you prove that? That I didn't need those medications? I can document that you show no signs of the conditions he claimed to be treating. I can establish that you're currently functioning well without medication, but proving what he gave you and why will be more complex. We'd need the physical pills, ideally with documentation of his prescribing them. Maya thought about the documents in the storage locker. I might have something, files from his office. I don't know exactly what's in them. I just grabbed everything I could reach. Dr. Morrison's eyes sharpened with interest. If there are prescription records, treatment notes, anything documenting what he was giving you and why, that could be very valuable. But we need to be careful about how we handle them. Chain of custody matters in legal cases. They talked for another hour, Dr. Morrison asking detailed questions about Maya's mental state, her sleep patterns, her ability to function day to day. She administered several standardized assessments, questionnaires designed to measure depression, anxiety, and PTSD symptoms. By the time the session ended, Maya felt wrung out but also strangely validated. Someone with expertise and authority had listened to her story and said, unequivocally, that she wasn't the problem. I'll prepare a full report for Sarah Chen, Dr. Morrison said as they concluded. I'm also going to recommend you see a therapist regularly. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because working through trauma is hard and you shouldn't do it alone. I can provide referrals if you'd like. Yes, thank you. Maya stood feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Dr. Morrison, do you think, if this goes to court, do you think anyone will believe me? Over him? The psychiatrist's expression grew serious. I won't lie to you, Maya. Cases like this are difficult. Richard has reputation and resources on his side, but you have truth, and that matters. More importantly, you have a documented pattern of abuse and expert testimony to support it. It's not a guarantee, but it's a fighting chance. A fighting chance. It wasn't much, but it was more than Maya had dared hope for. She found Ethan in the waiting room, reading something on his phone. He looked up when she emerged, searching her face. How did it go? Good, I think. She doesn't think I'm crazy. Of course you're not crazy. He stood, pocketing his phone. Anyone who actually listened to you would know that. They walked to the car together, and Maya felt something shift inside her. Not hope, exactly, but the absence of its opposite. The crushing certainty that she was fundamentally broken was cracking, letting in slivers of light. Thank you, she said as they pulled out of the parking lot. I know I keep saying that, but I mean it. Thank you for believing me when you had no reason to. I had every reason to. Ethan's voice was quiet, but certain. Someone who's lying doesn't look like you did that first night. Doesn't flinch at kindness like it's violence. Doesn't carry that particular kind of fear in their eyes. Maya turned to look at him, really look at him, taking in the strong profile, the careful way he drove, the gentleness that lived beneath his serious exterior. She'd been in his house for 2 weeks, and he'd never once made her feel unsafe, never pushed her boundaries, never asked for anything except that she take care of herself. It was so foreign, so unlike anything she'd experienced with Richard, that she sometimes felt like she'd fallen into an alternate universe where men could be trusted, and kindness didn't come with conditions. Can I ask you something? She said. Always. Why aren't you angry with me for bringing this into your life, for putting grace at risk, for disrupting your peaceful existence? Most people would be furious. Ethan was quiet for a moment, navigating through traffic. After Sarah died, he said finally, I was angry at everything. Angry at the drunk driver who killed her. Angry at the universe for being so fucking unfair. Angry at myself for not being there, even though there was nothing I could have done. That anger, it ate me alive for months. Grace would ask me questions and I'd snap at her. Friends would check in and I'd push them away. I was drowning in rage and grief, and I couldn't see a way out. He paused, collecting his thoughts. Sarah Chen. Miss Sarah. She's the one who finally got through to me. She showed up one day, walked past me into my kitchen, and started making dinner like she owned the place. When I told her to leave, she said, "You can be angry at the world, Ethan, or you can be present for your daughter. You can't do both." And she was right. I had to choose what I was going to do with all that pain, let it destroy me or transform it into something useful. So you chose to help people, Maya said softly. I chose to be the kind of person Sarah would have been proud of. She never passed suffering without trying to ease it. That was her superpower, seeing people, really seeing them, and making them feel worthy of care. He glanced at Maya. When I saw you in my headlights, terrified and hurt, and so obviously running from something terrible, I heard her voice in my head asking what the hell I was waiting for. How could I call myself her husband, Grace's father, a decent human being, if I just drove past you? Maya's throat tightened with emotion. She must have been an incredible person. She was. And so are you, even if you can't see it yet. You survived something that would have broken a lot of people. You found the strength to run, to fight, to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. That's not weakness, Maya. That's power. They drove the rest of the way home in companionable silence, and Maya found herself thinking about transformation, about how suffering could either destroy you or forge you into something stronger. She wasn't sure which one she was yet, destroyed or forged, but for the first time, she was willing to find out. Grace was already home when they arrived, bursting with news about her day. She'd gotten an A on her math test. Emma had shared her cookies at lunch, and Miss Sarah had taught her a new piano piece that was super hard but also super pretty. Did Maya's doctor appointment go okay? Grace asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood, and Maya felt her chest constrict at the casual way the girl included her in the family narrative. It went fine, sweetheart, Ethan said. Maya's just fine. Good, because we're having tacos tonight and it's more fun when everyone's here. Grace grabbed Maya's hand and pulled her toward the kitchen. Come help me set the table. Daddy always puts the forks on the wrong side. There is no wrong side, Ethan protested, following them. Yes, there is. Forks go on the left. Mommy told me that, and Mommy knew everything about proper tables. The easy invocation of her mother's memory, spoken without pain or hesitation, made Maya's heart ache. Grace had learned to carry her loss with grace, to honor her mother while still moving forward. It was a lesson Maya needed to learn. Dinner was chaotic and warm, Grace dominating the conversation with stories about school politics that seemed far too complex for third grade. Ethan listened with patient amusement, occasionally interjecting questions or gentle corrections when Grace's narrative veered into obvious embellishment. After dinner, while Ethan cleaned up and Grace practiced piano, Maya retreated to her room with the notebook she'd been filling with memories and testimonies. Sarah Chen had requested a timeline, and Maya was trying to organize 4 years of abuse into some kind of coherent narrative. It was harder than she'd expected. The memories didn't come in order, and some events had been so thoroughly rewritten by Richard's gaslighting that she couldn't separate what had actually happened from what he'd convinced her happened. She was deep in concentration when a knock came at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting Ethan. Instead, Grace slipped inside, still in her school clothes, her expression unusually serious. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course." Maya set aside the notebook and gestured to the bed. "What's on your mind?" Grace climbed up and sat cross-legged, picking at a loose thread on her jeans. For a moment she didn't speak, just worried at that thread like it held the secrets of the universe. "Are you going to stay?" she asked finally, not looking up. Maya's heart clenched. "What do you mean?" "After you're not scared anymore. After the bad person stops looking for you. Are you going to leave?" The question was so direct, so achingly vulnerable, that Maya didn't know how to answer honestly without hurting this child who'd already lost so much. "I don't know what happens after," she said carefully. "I'm still figuring that out. Daddy says people come into our lives for reasons. Some people stay forever and some people are just visiting. Which one are you?" Maya reached out and covered Grace's small hand with her own. "I don't know yet, But I promise you this, whatever happens, however long I'm here, I will never forget how kind you and your father have been to me. You saved my life, Grace. Both of you. I didn't do anything. I just gave you Mr. Whiskers. You did more than that. You reminded me that good people exist, that there's still kindness in the world. When you're running from something terrible, you start to forget that. You forget that not everyone wants to hurt you. Grace finally looked up, her brown eyes so like her mother's in the photos downstairs. The bad person, your husband, he hurt you a lot, didn't he? Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. Like hitting hurt or feeling hurt? Both. That's stupid, Grace declared with the absolute moral certainty of an 8-year-old. Husbands are supposed to love their wives and be nice to them. That's what Daddy says marriage is supposed to be. Love and niceness and choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. Your daddy is right. That's what marriage should be. But sometimes people lie about who they really are. They pretend to be nice until you're trapped, and then they show you who they really are. Grace processed this, her young face troubled. So how do you know who's safe and who's pretending? It was such an enormous question, one Maya wasn't sure she could answer for herself, let alone for a child. But Grace deserved honesty, so she tried. I think safe people show you who they are through their actions, not just their words. They respect your boundaries. They don't try to control you or make you feel small. They care about your happiness even when it's inconvenient for them. Like Daddy, Grace said confidently. Yes, like your daddy. Maya squeezed her hand gently. He's a good man, Grace. You're very lucky. I know. Miss Sarah says I should never settle for less when I grow up. She says I should find someone as good as Daddy or not bother at all. Maya smiled despite the heaviness in her chest. Miss Sarah is very smart. They sat together quietly for a moment, the sound of Ethan moving around downstairs a comforting backdrop. Then Grace asked, Do you think you'll ever have a family, like kids and stuff? The question hit Maya like a physical blow. She'd wanted children once, before Richard, before she'd learned that bringing a child into his world would be cruel beyond measure. He'd talked about it sometimes, how they'd have a son who would carry on his legacy, how he'd mold the child into his image. The way he'd spoken about their hypothetical children, like possessions to be programmed, had filled Maya with such horror that she'd secretly stayed on birth control even though he'd forbidden it, terrified of what he'd do to a child under his control. I don't know, she said honestly. I think I need to figure out how to have a life first before I can think about bringing someone else into it. Grace nodded like this made perfect sense. That's probably smart. Miss Sarah says you have to love yourself before you can love someone else, right? Miss Sarah says a lot of wise things. She does. That's why I listen to her. Grace hopped off the bed, apparently satisfied with the conversation. Okay, I have to go finish my homework. But Maya, I hope you stay. Even if you're just visiting, I hope you visit for a long time. After Grace left, Maya sat in the quiet of her room, feeling the weight of that child's hope settle over her like a blanket. She'd been so focused on survival, on just getting through each day, that she hadn't let herself think about what came after. What did she want her life to look like once she was free of Richard? Did she even remember how to want things for herself? The next few days fell into routine. Ethan worked from his home office, taking calls with clients and sketching designs, while Maya and Grace existed in parallel orbits, Grace at school or practicing piano, Maya working through her trauma timeline and trying to remember who she'd been before Richard. In the afternoons, she'd started tentatively helping Grace with homework, discovering that she actually enjoyed the challenge of explaining fractions or helping with book reports. Sarah Chen called Wednesday evening with an update. Her contact had retrieved the documents from the storage locker. Everything was now in Sarah's possession, and she was going through them methodically. What she'd found so far was disturbing. Richard kept meticulous records, Sarah told Maya over speakerphone, Ethan listening beside her at the kitchen table. Companies, he might back off from pursuing Maya. Or it might make him more desperate, Maya said quietly. If he thinks he's about to lose everything, he might do something reckless. Sarah was silent for a moment. That's a valid concern, which is why we need to be strategic about how and when we use this information. I'm continuing to build the case. In the meantime, Maya, I need you to stay vigilant but not paranoid. Keep a low profile, don't go anywhere alone, and trust your instincts. After they hung up, Maya sat at the table feeling the weight of Sarah's warning. Richard was many things, but he wasn't reckless. He was calculated, patient, always thinking several moves ahead. If he suspected she had evidence against him, he'd be planning his countermove. You're catastrophizing again, Ethan observed gently. I'm being realistic. You don't know Richard like I do. He doesn't give up. He doesn't lose. If he thinks I'm a threat to him now instead of just an escaped possession, he'll come at me harder. Let him try. There was steel in Ethan's voice. He might have been able to control you when you were isolated and alone, but you're not alone anymore. He'll have to go through all of us, and I promise you, we're a lot more stubborn than he's counting on. Maya wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that safety in numbers would be enough. But she'd learned the hard way that Richard didn't fight fair, didn't follow rules, didn't care about collateral damage. If he decided Ethan and Grace were obstacles, he'd find ways to remove them. That night, Maya dreamed about Richard for the first time since escaping. In the dream, she was back in their Fairfield house, trying to run but finding every door locked, every window sealed. Richard's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, calm and reasonable and absolutely certain that she was behaving irrationally. You're sick, Rebecca, he said. Rebecca, the name she'd been trying to escape. You need help. Why won't you let me help you? She woke gasping, her heart hammering, Grace's cartoon cat notebook clutched to her chest like a talisman. The clock read 3:47 a.m. The house was dark and quiet except for the familiar creaks of settling wood. She was safe. She was in Riverside, in Ethan's guest room, miles from Richard's reach. But the dream clung to her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that the fragile peace she'd found here was about to shatter. She was right. Friday afternoon, Sarah Chen arrived unannounced, her expression grim. She gathered Maya and Ethan in the living room, waiting until Grace was safely upstairs before speaking. We have a problem, Sarah said without preamble. Richard filed a missing person report with more details yesterday. He's offering a reward for information leading to Maya's location, $50,000. The number hit Maya like a punch. $50,000. That was enough to make people look twice at strangers, to report anyone who seemed out of place. That was enough to turn neighbors into bounty hunters. There's more, Sarah continued. He's hired a private investigator. Someone good, with connections to local police departments across New England. They're circulating your photo, the one from the news article, but also others. Earlier pictures showing you with different hair lengths, different styles. They're being thorough. How long do we have? Ethan asked, his voice tight. I don't know. Could be days, could be weeks. Depends on how lucky we get and how good this investigator is. Sarah turned to Maya. I think it's time to consider going to the police ourselves, filing a report about the abuse, getting ahead of Richard's narrative. No. The word came out sharp, panicked. He has friends in the police. He's consulted on cases, done evaluations for them. They trust him. They'll believe him over me. Not if we have evidence, not if we have Dr. Morrison's evaluation and the documents from his office. It's not enough, Maya insisted, her chest tightening with fear. You said yourself that abuse cases are hard to prove. If I go to the police now, Richard will know exactly where I am. He'll have me committed before I can blink. I'll disappear into some psychiatric facility and no one will ever believe anything I say again. Maya, no. She stood abruptly, needing to move, to pace, to do something with the terror coursing through her veins. You don't understand what he's capable of. He's not just an abuser. He's a master manipulator with credentials and connections. He spent years building a reputation as a caring, brilliant psychiatrist while destroying me piece by piece. Going to the police is suicide. Ethan stood too, positioning himself between Maya and the door, not blocking but grounding. Then what do you want to do? We can't just wait for him to find you. I could run again. Really run this time. Change my name, go somewhere far away where he'd never think to look. You tried that, Ethan said gently. It didn't work. You ended up exhausted and desperate and throwing yourself in front of my car. Running isn't sustainable. Neither is this, Maya's voice cracked. Hiding in your house, putting you and Grace in danger, waiting for the inevitable moment when Richard's investigator knocks on your door. At least if I'm gone, you're safe. We don't want to be safe if it means abandoning you, Ethan said quietly, and the certainty in his voice broke something open in Maya's chest. She sank back onto the couch, her head in her hands. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fight someone with so much more power than me. Sarah moved to sit beside her, her voice softening. You fight smart instead of hard. We have evidence of his fraud and malpractice. We have expert testimony about your mental state. We have a timeline of abuse documented in your own words. What we need now is to make Richard more afraid of exposure than he is motivated to find you. How? We threaten to go public. I draft a letter detailing what we've found, the overprescribing, the insurance fraud, the patient abuse. We send it to him through a secure channel, let him know that if he continues to pursue you, we'll release everything to the medical board, the insurance companies, and the press. We offer a deal. He drops the missing person case, he agrees to a quiet divorce, and we agree not to destroy his career. He'll never agree to that, Maya said. His reputation is everything to him. If he thinks I might expose him, he'll do whatever it takes to discredit me first. Maybe, but it buys us time and puts him on the defensive. Right now he thinks he controls the narrative. This shows him that's not true anymore. Ethan was nodding slowly. It's a calculated risk, but doing nothing is riskier. Maya looked between them, these two people who'd risked so much to help her and felt the weight of their faith pressing down like a physical thing. They believed in her ability to fight back, believed that truth could triumph over Richard's carefully constructed lies. She wanted to believe it too. Okay, she whispered. Okay, draft the letter. But Sarah, make sure it can't be traced back to Ethan or his address. If Richard comes after anyone, it should be me. That's not how this works, Ethan said firmly. We're in this together now, all of us. The next 24 hours were tense with waiting. Sarah worked through the night, drafting and revising the letter, making sure every claim could be substantiated, every threat legally sound. On Saturday morning, she sent it through an encrypted email service to Richard's personal account, bypassing his office where secretaries might screen his messages. Now they waited for his response. Maya spent Saturday in a state of barely controlled panic, jumping at every sound, unable to eat or focus on anything. Grace noticed something was wrong but didn't push, just stayed close, offering silent companionship and occasional Mr. Whiskers hugs. Ethan worked in his office but kept the door open, checking on Maya every hour with coffee or snacks or just his steady presence. The response came Sunday afternoon. Sarah called, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. He responded, Maya, you need to hear this. She put the phone on speaker. Richard's email was brief, typed in his characteristic clinical style. Sarah Chen, I presume you're the legal representation for my unwell wife. While I appreciate your concern, I must inform you that the documents you reference were stolen from my private office, a criminal act. Any attempt to use them will result in immediate legal action against both you and Rebecca. More importantly, I'm concerned about the quality of legal counsel that would encourage a mentally unstable woman to make such serious accusations against her loving husband who only wants to help her. I've enclosed a letter from Rebecca's treating physician detailing her condition and need for immediate psychiatric intervention. I'm prepared to be generous and not press charges for the theft if Rebecca returns home immediately and resumes treatment. The alternative is far less pleasant for everyone involved. You have 48 hours to produce my wife. After that, I will be forced to take more aggressive measures to ensure her safety. Regards, Dr. Richard Brennan. The silence after Sarah stopped reading was deafening. Maya felt ice spreading through her veins, that old familiar terror Richard specialized in creating, calm, rational, absolutely implacable. The letter he attached, Sarah said carefully, is supposedly from a Dr. Harrison Ellis, who claims to have been treating you for severe bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder. It describes you as delusional, potentially dangerous to yourself and others, and in need of immediate psychiatric hospitalization. I've never heard of a Dr. Harrison Ellis, Maya said numbly. Richard must have written it himself. That's my assumption too, but without proof, it's your word against a supposedly independent medical professional. Richard's playing this exactly as we feared, using his professional network to paint you as unreliable. Ethan had gone very still, his jaw tight with controlled anger. So what now? We just let him threaten us? No, Sarah said firmly. Now we call his bluff. I respond, making it clear that we have evidence of the fraudulent letter, handwriting analysis if needed, verification that this Dr. Ellis either doesn't exist or never treated Maya. I point out that threatening legal action against stolen documents is an implicit admission that those documents are real and damaging, and I give him 48 hours to withdraw the missing person case, or we go public with everything. That's escalating, Maya said, her voice shaking. That's declaring war. We were already at war, Sarah countered. He fired the first shot when he reported you missing and hired an investigator. We're just finally firing back. The question is, are you ready for this fight? Maya looked at Ethan, at the steady certainty in his eyes, the protective set of his shoulders. She thought about Grace upstairs, innocently practicing piano, trusting that the adults would keep her safe. She thought about the woman she'd been 4 years ago, before Richard, confident, capable, whole. She thought about the woman she might become if she found the courage to stop running. Yes, she said, and felt the words settle into her bones like truth. I'm ready. Sarah sent the response within the hour, her legal training evident in every precisely chosen word. The counter-threat was elegant and devastating. Exposure not just of Richard's treatment of Maya, but of a pattern of misconduct spanning years. Evidence of insurance fraud, patient records showing inappropriate prescribing, financial documents revealing unreported income. Everything laid out with the clinical precision of a prosecutor's opening statement. The 48-hour countdown began. Maya spent those 2 days in a state of suspended animation, unable to eat more than a few bites, unable to sleep for more than an hour at a stretch. Every time her eyes closed, she saw Richard's face, calm, controlled, absolutely certain of his superiority. He'd always been 10 steps ahead of her. What made her think this time would be different? Ethan tried to distract her with work, asking her opinion on landscape designs he was developing for clients. She found herself drawn into the projects despite her anxiety, offering suggestions about plant placement and color schemes that surprised both of them with their intuition. There was something soothing about thinking in terms of growth and seasons, about creating beauty that would unfold over time. Grace was more direct in her approach to distraction. Monday after school, she marched into the living room where Maya sat staring blankly at a book she wasn't reading and announced, "We're going to bake cookies, the chocolate chip kind with extra chips, because that's the only kind worth making." "Grace, I don't think—" "Nope, no thinking, just baking." Grace grabbed Maya's hand and pulled her toward the kitchen with surprising strength for someone so small. "Daddy says when you're worried about things you can't control, you should do something with your hands. Baking is perfect because you have to focus, or everything gets messed up." They baked 3 batches of cookies that afternoon, the kitchen filling with the warm smell of butter and sugar and chocolate. Grace chattered constantly, narrating her technique and explaining the exact ratio of chips to dough that her mother had perfected. Maya found herself genuinely smiling for the first time in days, caught up in Grace's enthusiasm and the simple pleasure of creating something that brought joy. "See," Grace said, biting into a still warm cookie. "Better, right?" "Better," Maya agreed, and meant it. Tuesday brought no response from Richard, which somehow felt more ominous than any threat. Sarah called twice with updates that weren't really updates. He hadn't withdrawn the missing person case, but he hadn't escalated either. They were in limbo, waiting to see who would blink first. That evening, after Grace had gone to bed, Maya found Ethan in his office, bent over a set of blueprints, with a pencil tucked behind his ear. She knocked softly on the door frame. "Can I come in?" He looked up, immediately setting aside his work. "Always. What's on your mind?" Maya entered and settled into the chair across from his desk, gathering her courage for a conversation she'd been avoiding. "I need to talk to you about what happens after. Assuming Sarah's plan works and Richard backs off. What then? I can't stay here forever, living off your charity, disrupting your life." "You're not disrupting anything," Ethan said immediately, but Maya held up a hand. "Please let me finish. You and Grace have given me something incredible. Safety, time to heal, a chance to remember who I am. But eventually I need to figure out how to stand on my own. I need a job, a place to live, some kind of future that isn't dependent on your generosity." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her with that thoughtful intensity she'd come to recognize. What did you do before Richard? You said you were an event coordinator. I was good at it too. I loved the challenge of taking someone's vision and making it reality, solving problems on the fly, creating experiences people would remember. Maya's voice softened with memory. Richard convinced me to quit about a year into our marriage. Said the stress was too much for me, that I needed to focus on taking care of myself and our home. I believed him because I was exhausted from trying to meet his standards. Now I realize the exhaustion came from him, not the job. So you want to get back into event coordination? I don't know, maybe. But who's going to hire me? I don't have recent experience, no references I can use without Richard finding out. My professional network is 4 years out of date. I'm basically starting from zero. Not zero, Ethan corrected gently. You have skills that don't expire. Organization, creativity, problem solving, those don't disappear just because you took time off. And you have something else now too. Perspective, strength, the knowledge that you survived something that would have broken a lot of people. That's not exactly something I can put on a resume. Maybe not directly, but it shapes who you are and what you're capable of. He paused, seeming to consider something. I have a proposal. It's completely optional, and there's no pressure either way. But hear me out. Maya nodded, curious despite herself. My business is growing faster than I can manage alone, Ethan said. I've been turning down projects because I don't have the bandwidth to handle the administrative side. Scheduling, client communications, vendor coordination, that kind of thing. I need help, and from what you've told me about your event coordination work, you'd be perfect for it. You want to hire me? Maya felt a surge of hope immediately tempered by suspicion. Ethan, I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept charity disguised as employment. It's not charity. I genuinely need help, and you genuinely have the skills I need. Yes, there's an element of wanting to help you get back on your feet, but this would be a real job with real responsibilities and actual pay. You'd be earning your keep, not accepting handouts. Maya studied his face, searching for signs of pity or obligation, but found only sincerity. What would the job actually entail? Ethan's eyes lit up as he launched into explanation. Right now, I'm drowning in emails and phone calls and scheduling conflicts. I need someone to manage the client communication pipeline, coordinate with contractors and vendors, handle invoicing and project timelines. Eventually, if it works out, maybe help with proposals and new client presentations. You'd work from here initially. I have a second office space that's just being used for storage. But there's flexibility. Once things stabilize with Richard, you could work remotely or from an actual office if we grow enough to rent space. And the pay? He named a figure that was modest but fair, enough to start saving money and rebuilding financial independence. Plus health insurance once you've been on board for 90 days. I know it's not what you probably made before, but it's a starting point. Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes. This was more than a job offer. It was a lifeline, a path toward autonomy she'd thought was years away. Why are you doing this? Really? Because I need help and you need work. Because I think we'd make a good team. Because... He hesitated, then continued quietly. Because Sarah would have wanted me to. Not in a morbid way, but in the sense that she always believed in giving people chances to rebuild. After she died, her friends rallied around me in grace in ways I never could have asked for. They showed up with meals and childcare and help even when I was too proud or too broken to accept it. This is me paying that forward. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. No pressure, no timeline. But Maya, you're not imposing by being here. You're part of this household now, and that means you get a say in your future. If working together feels right, we do it. If not, we'll figure out something else. But please stop acting like you're a burden when you're anything but. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. The offer was everything she needed and more than she'd dared hope for, but accepting meant letting go of the last vestiges of her old life, committing to this new reality she was building brick by brick. I'll think about it, she managed finally. Thank you. For everything. She left Ethan to his work and retreated to her room, mind spinning. In the span of 3 weeks, her life had transformed from desperate flight to the possibility of genuine stability. It felt too fast, too easy, like the universe was setting her up for a fall. But maybe that was Richard's voice in her head again, The one that said she didn't deserve good things, that happiness was always temporary and came with a price. Wednesday morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of November day that promised early winter. Maya woke to Grace's excited voice in the hallway. "Daddy! Daddy, come look at the garden!" Curious, Maya pulled on a sweater and followed the sound of voices to the back door. Through the window, she could see what had captured Grace's attention. Overnight, the first frost had transformed the abandoned garden into something almost beautiful. Spider webs hung between dead stalks, each strand outlined in crystalline perfection. The brown remnants of last year's flowers glittered with ice. "It's like a fairy garden," Grace breathed, pressing her nose to the glass. "Everything's all sparkly." "That's just frost, sweetheart," Ethan said, but he was smiling. "I know what it is, but it's still magic." Grace turned to Maya. "Do you think flowers would grow in spring if we planted them now?" "Not if we plant now," Maya said, moving to stand beside her. "But we could prepare the beds, clear out the dead plants, enrich the soil. Then in early spring, as soon as the ground thaws, we could plant. Bulbs would go in even sooner, late winter for things like tulips and daffodils." "Could we really?" Grace looked at her father hopefully. "Could we make the garden pretty again like when Mommy was alive?" Ethan's expression did something complicated, pain and hope and resignation all tangled together. "I don't know, Grace. Gardens take a lot of work, and I'll help," Maya heard herself say. "If you want. I could use a project, something physical to focus on. And Grace could help too, learn about gardening." "Please, Daddy." Grace deployed her most persuasive expression, the one that apparently worked on Ethan more often than he'd like to admit. "All right," he conceded. "But just clearing and preparing for now. We'll see about planting come spring." Grace whooped and threw her arms around Maya's waist. "This is going to be so cool! We'll make it the prettiest garden on the whole street." After Grace left for school, Maya and Ethan stood together looking out at the neglected plot. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I know you offered for Grace's sake, but it's a lot of work for something that's essentially my responsibility." "I want to," Maya said, and realized she meant it. There's something appealing about working with growing things, about taking something that seems dead and helping it come back to life. Feels metaphorical. Ethan smiled slightly. Sarah always said gardens were therapeutic. She'd spend hours out there, said it helped her think. "Tell me about her," Maya said impulsively. "About your wife, if you want to, I mean. You've heard my whole tragic story, but I've only gotten glimpses of yours." They moved to the kitchen, Ethan making coffee with the automatic efficiency of long practice. Once they were settled at the table, he began to talk, and Maya heard the love and loss that still colored every word. "Sarah and I met in college, junior year. She was studying music education, and I was doing architecture. We had exactly one class together, some general ed requirement about Western civilization. She sat in front of me and had this laugh that would just bubble out during lectures when the professor said something ridiculous. I spent half the semester trying to work up the courage to talk to her." "What finally made you do it?" "She beat me to it. Turned around one day after class and said, 'You've been staring at the back of my head for 6 weeks. Either you have a question about my hair care routine or you want to ask me out. Which is it?'" Ethan smiled at the memory. "I stammered something incoherent and she took pity on me, suggested coffee. We were inseparable after that." "She sounds amazing." She was. Funny, smart, passionate about everything she did. When Grace was born, watching Sarah become a mother, it was like seeing her discover this whole new dimension of herself. She was so patient, so creative in the way she taught Grace about the world. His voice went rough with emotion. "The accident was so stupid, so preventable. Wrong place, wrong time, some drunk asshole who decided his convenience was more important than other people's lives. One moment she was here, the next she was gone. No warning, no goodbye, just gone." Maya reached across the table and took his hand. A gesture of comfort she would have flinched from receiving a month ago, but could now give freely. "I'm so sorry." The worst part was watching Grace try to understand it. She was 5, old enough to know her mother wasn't coming back, but too young to really comprehend death. She'd ask when Mommy was coming home from the hospital, and I'd have to explain again that Mommy wasn't at the hospital, she was in heaven. Except Grace didn't really believe in heaven yet, So that just confused her more. Ethan's thumb moved absently over Maya's hand. Sarah Chen, Miss Sarah. She was the one who finally got through to Grace. Explained it in terms of music, about how songs end but the feelings they create stay with us. Grace understood that. You've done an incredible job with her. She's so well adjusted, so kind and confident. That's a testament to your parenting. I'm fumbling through it most days. Sarah was the natural parent. I'm just trying not to screw up too badly. You're being too hard on yourself. Grace is happy, healthy, loved. That's what matters. They sat in comfortable silence, the history of his loss hanging between them alongside her history of trauma. Two different kinds of pain, two different paths to survival, but finding common ground in the simple human need to be seen and understood. The phone rang, shattering the moment. Ethan glanced at the caller ID and his expression tightened. "It's Sarah," he answered on speaker. "Tell me something good." "I have news," Sarah Chen said, her voice carefully neutral. "Richard's attorney contacted me an hour ago. They want to negotiate." Maya's heart leaped. "Negotiate what?" "Terms. Richard will withdraw the missing person case and agree to a no-fault divorce in exchange for your silence about his practice irregularities. You'd sign a non-disclosure agreement, he'd provide a financial settlement, and you'd both go your separate ways." It sounded too good to be true, which immediately made Maya suspicious. "What's the catch?" "The NDA is broad and binding. You couldn't speak publicly about your marriage, the abuse, or anything you learned about his practice. You'd essentially be buying your freedom with your silence." "That's letting him get away with it," Ethan said sharply. "He abused her for years and he just walks away free?" "He walks away with his career damaged," Sarah corrected. "We've already filed complaints with the medical board based on the documents we have. Even if Maya can't speak about it, those investigations will proceed. He'll face consequences, just not criminal ones." Maya's mind raced, weighing options that all felt inadequate. "What's the settlement amount?" Sarah named a figure that made Maya's breath catch. Enough to start over completely, to get an apartment, to rebuild a life without depending on anyone. It was tempting, so tempting to take the money and run, to put Richard behind her and never look back. "How long do I have to decide?" "They want an answer by end of business tomorrow. Richard is eager to resolve this quickly." "Because the medical board investigation is making him nervous," Maya said. "He wants me silenced before I can testify." "Probably. But Maya, you need to think carefully about this. Fighting Richard publicly would be incredibly difficult. You'd have to relive your trauma in depositions and potentially in court. You'd be painted as mentally unstable by his defense attorneys. It could take years and cost a fortune with no guarantee of winning. This settlement gives you a clean break and financial security. Sometimes the best revenge is living well." After Sarah hung up, Maya and Ethan sat in heavy silence. The offer was everything Maya had claimed to want: escape, independence, the ability to move forward. So why did it feel like betrayal? "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked quietly. "I'm thinking that taking this deal means Richard wins. He buys my silence, preserves most of his reputation, and continues his life with minimal consequences. Meanwhile, I have to live with the knowledge that he's still out there, still treating vulnerable patients, still capable of hurting people." "But you'd be free." "Would I? Or would I just be bought off?" Maya stood and paced to the window, staring out at the frost-covered garden. "I spent 4 years letting Richard control me. If I take this settlement, I'm still letting him control me. I'm still choosing the path he's laid out because it's easier than fighting. There's no shame in choosing peace over war, Maya. You've already survived so much. You don't owe anyone more suffering just to prove a point." "It's not about proving a point. It's about—" She struggled to articulate the feeling crystallizing in her chest. "It's about refusing to disappear. That's what Richard wants, for me to take the money and vanish, to become another woman who whispers about abuse but never names it. If I do that, how am I different from who I was when I lived with him? Still silent, still complicit in my own erasure." Ethan came to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "So what do you want to do?" Maya thought about the notebook full of testimony sitting in her room, about Dr. Morrison's evaluation, about the other women Richard had likely hurt over the years, women who might still be suffering because no one had stopped him, about Grace asking if she was staying, about the possibility of a future built on more than just survival. I want to say no to the settlement, she said finally. I want to testify to the medical board. I want to help them build a case that ends his license, that prevents him from hurting anyone else. But, her voice wavered, I'm terrified of facing him, of having my life picked apart, of losing. Then we'll face it together. You, me, Sarah, everyone who believes you. You won't be alone this time. Maya turned to look at him, this man who'd pulled her from the rain and given her shelter without asking for anything in return. Why do you care so much? I'm still trying to understand why you've invested so much in helping me. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. After Sarah died, I was so lost. Grace was lost. We were these two broken people trying to pretend we were functional. And then people showed up. Sarah Chen, other friends, even strangers who'd heard what happened. They showed up and they helped us survive those first terrible months. They taught me that we're not meant to suffer alone, that helping each other through darkness is what makes us human. He met her eyes steadily. When I saw you in my headlights that night, I saw someone who needed help in a way that went beyond physical danger. You were running from a different kind of death, the kind that kills you from the inside. How could I call myself a good person, a good father, if I looked at that and chose to do nothing? Helping you isn't charity, Maya. It's humanity. It's what we're supposed to do for each other. Maya felt tears spilling over, unable to hold them back any longer. She'd spent so long believing she was unworthy of help, that her suffering was her own fault for being weak or foolish or broken. Hearing Ethan articulate the opposite, that she deserved care simply by virtue of being human, cracked open something fundamental in her understanding of herself. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. You don't have to thank me. You just have to decide what you want your life to look like, and let us help you build it. That night, Maya lay awake long after the house fell quiet, thinking about choices and consequences. The safe path was clear. Take Richard's money, sign the NDA, disappear into a new life somewhere far from Connecticut. She could change her name legally, start over completely, leave Maya behind like a snake shedding old skin. But safety came with a price: silence, complicity, the knowledge that she'd chosen comfort over justice, that other women might suffer because she'd been too afraid to fight. The brave path was terrifying: refuse the settlement, testify publicly, let her life be examined and judged by strangers. Risk losing, risk Richard's retaliation, risk everything she'd begun to build here. By morning, Maya had made her decision. She found Ethan in the kitchen making breakfast, Grace still asleep upstairs. I'm saying no to the settlement, she told him without preamble. I'm going to testify to the medical board and help them build a case against Richard. If it goes to trial, I'll testify there too. Whatever it takes to stop him. Ethan set down the spatula and turned to face her fully. Are you sure? Once you refuse the settlement, there's no going back. Richard will fight dirty. I'm sure. For the first time since I left him, I'm actually sure about something. Maya's voice was steady, clear. I spent 4 years being afraid of Richard, letting fear control every choice. I'm done. He doesn't get to scare me into silence anymore. Then we'll support you every step of the way. Ethan pulled her into a brief, solid hug. You're braver than you know, Maya. Sarah Chen arrived within the hour after Maya called her. They sat around the kitchen table, Maya, Ethan, and Sarah, drafting the formal refusal of Richard's settlement offer. Sarah's fingers flew over her laptop keyboard, translating Maya's resolve into legal language. I need you to understand what you're committing to, Sarah said, her tone serious. Richard will be furious. He'll see this as a declaration of war. He may try to discredit you more aggressively, may hire investigators to dig into your past, may even try to have you arrested for theft of his documents. Can he do that? Maya asked. He can try. Whether it would stick is another matter. You have legitimate claims to some of those documents, and we can argue the rest were obtained under duress. But he'll make your life as difficult as possible. Sarah paused, meeting Maya's eyes directly. I'm not trying to scare you off. I'm trying to make sure you're going into this with eyes open. My eyes are open, Maya said firmly. Send the refusal. Sarah nodded and hit send. The message went out into the digital ether, Maya's bridge burned behind her. There was no safe retreat now, only forward into whatever battle Richard would wage. The response came faster than any of them expected. 2 hours later, Sarah's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered on speaker, and Richard Brennan's voice filled the kitchen, smooth and cultured and laced with barely controlled fury. "Ms. Chen, I'd like to speak with my wife. I know you've been advising her, but this is a private matter between a husband and wife. Surely you understand that. Dr. Brennan, I'm Maya's attorney. Any communication with her goes through me." "Maya," Richard said, and the name coming from his mouth made Maya's stomach clench. "Rebecca, darling, I know you're listening. This is foolish. You're sick and you need help. Come home and we'll forget all this unpleasantness. I'm willing to overlook the theft, the accusations, all of it. Just come home." Maya's hands were shaking, but she forced her voice steady. "I'm not coming home, Richard. I'm not sick, and I'm not your darling. I'm done letting you control me." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Maya wondered if he'd hung up. Then his voice came back, all pretense of warmth stripped away. "You've made a serious mistake, Rebecca. You think hiding with your new friends makes you safe? You think refusing my generous offer was smart? I built you from nothing, and I can return you to nothing just as easily. Everyone who's helped you, that lawyer, whoever's been sheltering you, they'll regret their involvement when I'm done." "Is that a threat, Dr. Brennan?" Sarah's voice was ice. "Because I'm recording this call, and threats against my client and myself are criminal acts." Another pause, then Richard's tone shifted back to controlled calm. "No threat, Ms. Chen. Simply a statement of fact. Rebecca is mentally unstable. The people around her should understand they're enabling someone who needs psychiatric care, not legal representation. I worry about what she might do, to herself or to them, without proper treatment." The implications were clear. He was laying groundwork to claim Maya was dangerous, potentially violent. If anything happened to Ethan or Grace, Richard would point to this moment and say he'd warned everyone. "This conversation is over," Sarah said curtly. "All future communication goes through proper legal channels. Do not call me again." She disconnected, and the sudden silence felt like a void. Maya realized she was trembling, adrenaline flooding her system from hearing Richard's voice again after weeks of relative safety. That smooth, reasonable tone that had once made her doubt her own sanity now just made her angry. "He's going to come after all of you because of me," she said, guilt crushing her chest. "Ethan, Grace, you heard him. He'll find ways to hurt you to get to me." "Let him try," Ethan said, his voice harder than she'd ever heard it. "I'm not some isolated woman he can gaslight and control. I have resources, friends, a community. If he comes after me or my daughter, he'll find out what happens when you pick fights with people who fight back." "He's dangerous, Ethan. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. He's a bully who's used to intimidating people who can't defend themselves. But you're not alone anymore, and neither am I. We're stronger together than he is by himself, no matter how much money or reputation he has." Sarah nodded agreement. Richard just made a critical error. He threatened witnesses and opposing counsel on a recorded line. That goes in our evidence file and can be used against him. He's angry, which means he's making mistakes. Angry people are sloppy. Or desperate, Maya countered. Desperate people are dangerous. The rest of the day was spent in strategy sessions. Sarah outlined the timeline for the medical board investigation, what Maya's testimony would entail, how to prepare for Richard's inevitable counterattacks. They discussed security measures, changing locks, installing cameras, being aware of surroundings. Ethan insisted on all of it over Maya's protests that it was too much. When Grace came home from school, they tried to maintain normalcy, but the 8-year-old wasn't fooled. She took one look at the tense faces around the kitchen table and asked, "Did something bad happen?" "Just adult stuff, sweetheart," Ethan said. "Nothing for you to worry about." But Grace looked at Maya with those solemn, too wise eyes. "The bad person called, didn't he?" Maya nodded, not wanting to lie to her. "He did. But we're handling it. You're safe, I promise." "I'm not worried about me," Grace said with the confidence of a child who'd always been protected. "I'm worried about you. Are you okay?" The question, asked with such genuine concern, made Maya's throat tight. "I will be. Your dad and Miss Sarah are helping me be brave." "Good," Grace said firmly, "because you're part of our family now, and we take care of each other." That's the rule. Later, after Grace had gone to bed, Maya stood in the darkened living room looking at the photographs of Ethan's life with Sarah. There they were at their wedding, young and radiant. There on a beach somewhere, Grace a toddler between them. There at what looked like a piano recital, Sarah's hand on young Grace's shoulder, both beaming at the camera. "She would have liked you," Ethan said quietly from the doorway, making Maya jump. "How can you know that?" "Because she liked everyone who was brave enough to be honest about their struggles. She always said that pretending to be perfect was the loneliest way to live." He came to stand beside Maya, looking at his own history documented on the walls. "Sarah was the strongest person I ever knew, but she wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. She cried at movies, admitted when she was wrong, asked for help when she needed it. That's real strength," she'd say, "not pretending you don't need anyone." "I'm trying to learn that," Maya said. "The asking for help part, it's harder than it sounds." "Most worthwhile things are." Ethan turned to face her. "Maya, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. Whatever happens with Richard, whether you win or lose, whether the medical board revokes his license or gives him a slap on the wrist, you have a place here as long as you want it. The job offer stands regardless. This isn't contingent on anything except you wanting to stay." "Why?" The question came out raw, bewildered. "Why would you tie yourself to someone with this much baggage?" "Because baggage doesn't define people. How they carry it does. You could have stayed broken. You could have let Richard win by giving up on yourself. Instead, you ran. You fought. You got back up every time life knocked you down. That's not baggage, Maya. That's character." Maya felt something shift in her chest, some fundamental belief about her own worthlessness cracking under the weight of Ethan's unwavering faith in her. She'd spent so long seeing herself through Richard's eyes, broken, difficult, unstable. Learning to see herself through other eyes, through Ethan's and Grace's, and even her own slowly healing perspective, it was revolutionary. "I want to take the job," she said, "and I want to stay, at least for now. If you're sure, I'm sure." His smile was warm and genuine. "Welcome to Walker Landscape Architecture, Maya. Tomorrow we'll get you set up properly in the office and start transferring files. Fair warning, my organizational system is chaos. Then it's good you're hiring someone who specializes in organizing chaos." They stood together in the comfortable silence that had become familiar between them, survivors of different tragedies, finding unexpected companionship and shared determination to keep living despite everything. Outside, the frost-covered garden glittered under moonlight, dead things transformed into temporary beauty by ice and starlight. Come spring, Maya thought, they'd bring it back to life. Plant new flowers where old ones had died. Create something beautiful from abandoned ground. It felt like a metaphor she was finally ready to embrace. The medical board hearing was scheduled for the first week of December, giving Maya 3 weeks to prepare her testimony. Those weeks passed in a blur of activity that left little room for fear to take root. She spent mornings working for Ethan's business, quickly discovering that his definition of chaos was actually just a creative mind that didn't think in linear organizational patterns. Within days, she'd implemented a project management system that tracked clients, timelines, and deliverables with color-coded clarity that made Ethan shake his head in amazement. "How did I ever function without you?" he asked one afternoon, looking at the dashboard she'd created that showed every active project at a glance. "Badly, from what I can tell," Maya replied, but she was smiling. The work was satisfying in ways she'd forgotten work could be, solving problems, creating order from disorder, feeling competent and valued. Ethan consulted her on everything from client proposals to design elements, treating her input as genuinely important rather than something to be humored and dismissed. It was intoxicating, the sense of being respected. Afternoons were spent with Sarah Chen preparing for the hearing. They went through Maya's testimony line by line, anticipating Richard's attorney's attacks, practicing responses until Maya could deliver them without her voice shaking. Dr. Morrison joined several sessions, coaching Maya on how to describe her experiences in clinical terms that would resonate with the medical board. Other women had come forward too, 3 former patients of Richard's who'd experienced similar patterns of inappropriate prescribing and boundary violations. Their combined testimony was building into something formidable. "He's going to try to paint you as vindictive," Sarah warned during one prep session. an angry ex-wife with an axe to grind. You need to stay calm no matter what he says, no matter how his attorney tries to provoke you. The moment you lose control, you lose credibility. I can do calm, Maya said, though she wasn't entirely sure. Facing Richard in person after everything, it terrified her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Evenings belonged to Grace, who'd appointed herself Maya's official stress relief coordinator. They worked on the garden together, clearing away years of neglect, Grace chattering constantly about what they'd plant in spring, while Maya found unexpected peace in physical labor. There was something profound about pulling up dead things to make room for new growth, about preparing soil that would eventually support life again. One evening in late November, as they worked side by side in the fading light, Grace asked, "Are you scared about the hearing?" Maya considered lying, offering some adult platitude about everything being fine, but Grace deserved better than that. "Yes," she admitted, "very scared." "What's the worst that could happen?" "The board might not believe me. Richard might keep his medical license. He might—" Maya paused, not wanting to burden a child with adult fears. "He might hurt you again," Grace finished quietly. When Maya looked at her in surprise, Grace shrugged. "I'm not a baby. I know what bad people do when they don't get in trouble. That's why we have to make sure he gets in trouble." "We?" "All of us. You, Daddy, Miss Sarah, the other people who are helping. We're like the Avengers, but for real life. Everybody has a job, and together we're strong enough to win." Grace said this with such absolute conviction that Maya almost believed it. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. Adults just don't listen to kids most of the time." Grace pulled up a stubborn weed and tossed it in the yard waste bag with satisfaction. "Maya, even if the hearing doesn't go the way we want, you're still not going back to him, right?" "Right. No matter what happens, I'm never going back." "Good. Because you're happy here. I can tell. You smile more now, and you don't jump when doors close, and you laugh at Daddy's bad jokes, even though they're not funny." "Hey, some of his jokes are funny." "No, they're not. You're just being nice." Grace grinned at her. "But that's okay. Nice is good." Thanksgiving arrived with surprising speed, bringing with it Sarah Chen's invitation to join her family's dinner. Maya initially declined, not wanting to impose, but Ethan wouldn't hear of it. "Sarah's been hosting Thanksgiving for strays and orphans for 20 years, he said. "It's her thing. Trust me, she'd be offended if you didn't come. Besides, Grace has been bragging to Sarah's grandkids about how good you are at gardening. You'd break her heart if you didn't show up." So Maya found herself in Sarah Chen's warm, chaotic home, surrounded by a multi-generational feast of found family. Sarah's actual children were there with their spouses and kids, along with an assortment of friends and colleagues who, like Ethan and Grace, had been adopted into Sarah's orbit. The house smelled of turkey and pie, and something cinnamon that made Maya's mouth water. "You must be Maya," Sarah's daughter Jennifer said, pulling her into a hug before Maya could protest. "Mom's told us all about you. Welcome to the madness." The afternoon was overwhelming in the best way. Loud conversations overlapping, children running underfoot, food appearing in endless waves. Maya found herself relaxed in a way she hadn't been in years, swept up in the warmth and acceptance of people who asked nothing from her, except that she be present and eat too much pie. At one point, she found Sarah Chen in the kitchen, orchestrating dessert service with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. "Thank you," Maya said quietly, "for everything. The legal help, this invitation, all of it." Sarah set down the pie she'd been cutting and really looked at Maya. "You know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who's been to hell and chose to walk back out instead of letting it consume her. That takes guts. Ethan sees it too, though I don't think he's fully admitted to himself why he's so invested in your well-being." "What do you mean?" Sarah smiled knowingly. "I've known that man for 15 years. He loved my best friend with everything he had, and when she died, I watched a piece of him die too. For 3 years, he's been going through the motions, taking care of Grace, running his business, surviving but not really living. Then you showed up in his driveway, and something shifted. He has purpose again, someone to protect, something to fight for beyond just making it through another day." "I'm not Sarah," Maya said, understanding the implication and needing to address it immediately. "I can't be her replacement. No one's asking you to be. But maybe you could be yourself, and maybe that would be enough. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. Just think about it. Now go eat pie before the kids demolish everything. The conversation stayed with Maya through the rest of the holiday and into the following week. She'd been so focused on survival and the upcoming hearing that she hadn't let herself examine the dynamic growing between her and Ethan. They'd fallen into an easy domesticity, cooking together, watching movies after Grace went to bed, talking late into the night about everything and nothing. He made her laugh. He challenged her to be braver than she thought possible. When he looked at her, she felt seen in ways Richard had never allowed. But was it real, or was it just proximity and circumstance? Was she capable of trust after everything Richard had done? And even if she was, did Ethan see her as anything beyond a project, a wounded creature he was helping to heal? She was still wrestling with these questions when the hearing date arrived. December 3rd dawned cold and clear. The kind of winter day where the sky looked impossibly blue and the sun seemed to bring no warmth. Maya dressed carefully in clothes Sarah had helped her choose. Professional, but not severe. Nothing that would make her look either like a victim playing for sympathy or like someone unstable. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the State Medical Board offices in Hartford. Sarah picked Maya up at 8:30, giving them time to review strategy one final time during the drive. Ethan had wanted to come, but Sarah had advised against it. The more this looks like Maya has an army behind her, the easier it is for Richard's attorney to claim she's been coached or manipulated, Sarah had explained. She needs to stand on her own credibility. So Maya walked into the hearing room with only Sarah beside her, and the first person she saw was Richard. He sat at a table across the room, flanked by two attorneys in expensive suits, and the sight of him hit Maya like a physical blow. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, distinguished, with silver threading through dark hair at his temples. Handsome in that authoritative way that inspired trust. He was dressed impeccably in a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. When his eyes met hers, his expression was sympathetic, concerned. The face of a devoted husband worried about his unstable wife. Maya felt her knees weaken, old fear flooding her system. This was Richard in his element, calm, controlled, absolutely certain of his superiority. How could she possibly compete with that? Then she felt Sarah's hand on her elbow, steadying her. "Breathe," Sarah whispered. "Remember what we practiced. He's just a man who's about to answer for what he's done." The hearing itself was formal and procedural. The medical board consisted of 5 members, 3 physicians, a nurse practitioner, and a public representative. They sat behind a raised desk like judges, their expressions carefully neutral as they reviewed the complaints that had been filed against Dr. Richard Brennan. The charges were extensive: inappropriate prescribing practices, boundary violations with patients, insurance fraud, falsification of medical records. Each allegation was supported by documentation Sarah had meticulously compiled from the files Maya had taken from Richard's office. Richard's lead attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Winters, opened with a statement painting her client as a dedicated physician who'd been targeted by a mentally unstable wife seeking revenge for an unhappy marriage. "Dr. Brennan has devoted his career to helping vulnerable patients," she said smoothly. "He's a respected psychiatrist with an impeccable reputation. These allegations stem from marital discord and should not be used to destroy a good man's livelihood." Then it was time for testimony. Maya was called first, and the walk to the witness chair felt like miles. She could feel Richard's eyes on her, heavy with judgment and threat. But she made herself sit tall, made herself look at the board members instead of at him. Sarah led her through the questions they'd practiced. "Tell us about your marriage to Dr. Brennan. Describe the medications he prescribed to you. Did you have any diagnosed conditions that warranted these medications? How did these medications affect you?" Maya answered each question carefully, keeping her voice level even when describing the worst moments. She told them about the isolation, the gaslighting, the drugs that made her foggy and compliant. She described waking up with no memory of days, finding bruises she couldn't explain, being told she'd had episodes she didn't remember. "Dr. Brennan used his professional authority to convince me I was mentally ill," Maya said, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. "He prescribed medications I didn't need, documented conditions I didn't have, and systematically destroyed my sense of reality until I couldn't trust my own perceptions." When I finally escaped, I'd been transformed from a competent, independent woman into someone who couldn't even decide what to eat for breakfast without permission. Patricia Winter's cross-examination was brutal. She questioned every detail of Maya's story, pointed out gaps in her memory, suggested that Maya's current stability proved she'd needed the medications Richard prescribed. "Isn't it true," Winters asked, "that you've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder by independent physicians?" "No," Maya said firmly. "Dr. Brennan claimed I had those diagnoses, but I've never been evaluated by anyone independent while I was his patient. Since leaving him, I've been thoroughly evaluated by Dr. Patricia Morrison, a trauma specialist who found no evidence of any psychotic or personality disorders. What I have is PTSD from years of abuse." "Abuse is a strong word, Mrs. Brennan. Can you prove your husband abused you? Show us photographs of injuries, hospital records, police reports." "Psychological abuse doesn't always leave visible scars. And yes, I can show you evidence. The medications he prescribed without proper diagnosis, the notes in his files that contradict what he told me, the pattern of isolation and control that any expert would recognize as coercive abuse." The hearing lasted 4 hours. 3 other women testified after Maya, each describing similar experiences: inappropriate medications, boundary violations, Richard's use of his professional authority to manipulate and control. Their testimonies created a damning pattern that even Winter's aggressive questioning couldn't fully dismantle. Dr. Morrison testified about Maya's evaluation, explaining in clinical terms how the symptoms Richard had diagnosed were actually normal responses to prolonged trauma. A forensic accountant walked the board through the insurance fraud they'd uncovered in Richard's billing records. A colleague of Richard's, Dr. Michael Chen, Sarah's nephew as it turned out, testified about concerns he'd raised years ago about Richard's prescribing practices that had been dismissed by hospital administration. Finally, Richard himself took the stand. He was smooth, eloquent, wounded. "I loved my wife," he said, his voice heavy with emotion that Maya knew was performance. "I only wanted to help her. She was struggling, and I used every tool at my disposal to support her recovery. If my methods were unconventional, it was because conventional approaches weren't working. I never meant to hurt her. I only wanted to help." He painted himself as a devoted husband whose good intentions had been misinterpreted, whose medical decisions had been second-guessed by people who didn't understand the complexity of treating a loved one. He suggested that Maya's current allegations were symptoms of her underlying mental illness, that she'd been manipulated by vindictive attorneys seeking a payday. It was a masterful performance. Maya watched the board members' expressions and couldn't tell if they believed him or not. The hearing concluded with closing statements. Winters argued for dismissal of all charges, characterizing the case as a domestic dispute masquerading as professional misconduct. Sarah countered with the weight of evidence, the pattern of abuse, the other victims who'd come forward. "Dr. Brennan used his position of trust and authority to harm vulnerable people," Sarah said in conclusion. "He violated every ethical principle of his profession. The question before this board is simple. Will you allow a predator to continue practicing medicine, or will you protect future patients by holding him accountable?" The board announced they would deliberate and issue a decision within 30 days. Then it was over, and Maya found herself standing outside the building in the December cold, shaking not from temperature but from adrenaline crash. "You did beautifully," Sarah said, wrapping an arm around her. "You were clear, credible, and calm. Everything we needed." "But was it enough?" Maya's voice came out small, uncertain. "I think so. But we won't know for sure until the decision comes down. For now, you've done everything you can. The rest is up to them." Ethan was waiting at the house when they returned, Grace at school for another hour. He took one look at Maya's face and pulled her into his arms without a word. She let herself be held, let herself take comfort in his strength and warmth, too exhausted to question the gesture's meaning. "How bad?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. It could go either way." Maya pulled back, looking up at his concerned face. "I saw him, Ethan. After weeks of feeling stronger, of starting to heal, I saw Richard, and all I felt was that old fear. What if I'm never really free of him? What if he's always going to have this power over me?" "He doesn't have power over you. He has history with you. There's a difference." Ethan guided her to the couch, sitting beside her. Fear is reasonable when someone's hurt you, but fear doesn't mean he wins. You testified today. You told your truth in front of people whose job is to protect patients from doctors like him. That took more courage than I think you realize. I couldn't have done it without you, without all of this. Maya gestured around the house, meaning more than just the physical space, meaning the safety, the support, the restoration of her sense of self that had happened within these walls. Thank you doesn't feel like enough. Then don't thank me. Just keep moving forward. Keep building the life you deserve. That's all the payment I need. They sat together in comfortable silence until they heard the school bus rumbling down the street. Grace burst through the door minutes later, immediately reading the tension in the room. How did it go? She asked, dropping her backpack and climbing onto the couch between Maya and her father. It went okay, Maya said. Now we wait for the board to decide. They're going to decide that he's bad and you're good, Grace said with absolute confidence. Obviously. If only life were that simple, Maya thought. But she smiled at Grace's certainty and let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, the 8-year-old was right. The next 3 weeks were torture. Maya threw herself into work, taking on more responsibility for Ethan's business than he'd originally outlined. She organized a complete digital filing system, reached out to past clients about potential new projects, even started drafting proposals for spring installation jobs. Staying busy kept her from obsessively checking her phone every 5 minutes, though she still jumped every time it rang. Grace insisted they continue working on the garden despite the December cold. They covered the prepared beds with mulch, planned next year's layout, ordered bulbs from a catalog that would be delivered in late winter. We're planting hope, Grace announced one afternoon, and Maya felt the poetry of that statement settle into her bones. Christmas approached, bringing with it complicated feelings. Maya hadn't celebrated in years. Richard had considered holidays beneath him, commercialized nonsense that distracted from more important things. But Grace was determined that this Christmas would be special. You have to help us decorate, she told Maya seriously. It's your first Christmas as part of our family. It has to be perfect. They spent a weekend transforming the house. Grace directed operations from her position as self-appointed Christmas coordinator, while Ethan and Maya hung lights and arranged decorations that had been in storage since Sarah died. With each ornament they unwrapped, Ethan shared a memory. This one Sarah had bought on their honeymoon, that one Grace had made in preschool, these from their first Christmas as parents. She loved Christmas, Ethan said, holding a delicate glass angel. Made the whole thing magical, even when Grace was too young to really understand. Sarah said Christmas was about choosing joy, even when the world gave you reasons for sadness. She was right, Maya said softly, and found she meant it. Despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty about the hearing's outcome, the knowledge that Richard was still out there, she felt something like joy in this moment. Decorating a tree with people who cared about her, being part of traditions that mattered, knowing she had a place here. The medical board's decision came on December 20th, 5 days before Christmas. Sarah called at 9 in the morning, her voice carefully controlled. Maya, the board issued their ruling. Are you sitting down? Maya's heart hammered as she sank into the nearest chair. Ethan appeared in the doorway of his office, reading her body language, and came to stand beside her. She put the phone on speaker with shaking hands. Tell me. They found in your favor on almost every count. Richard's medical license has been suspended pending further investigation into the insurance fraud. He's been ordered to surrender patient files for independent review. He's banned from prescribing any controlled substances. And the board has referred his case to the state attorney general's office for potential criminal charges. Maya couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was hearing. What does that mean? Did we win? You won, Maya. He can't practice medicine. He can't hurt anyone else. It's not a complete victory. The criminal charges might not stick, and he'll appeal the suspension. But for now, right now, he's been stopped. The phone slipped from Maya's fingers as she broke down sobbing, 3 weeks of tension releasing in a flood of tears she couldn't control. Ethan caught her as she crumpled, holding her while she shook with the force of emotions she couldn't name. Relief, vindication, grief for everything she'd lost, joy for what she'd won back. You did it. Ethan murmured against her hair. You did it. You're free. Free. The word felt too large, too impossible, but maybe it was starting to be true. Sarah came over that evening with champagne and details about the ruling. The board had found her testimony and Dr. Morrison's evaluation particularly compelling, but it was the pattern established by the other victims that had sealed the case. Richard's defense had crumbled under the weight of evidence, his reputation finally matching his actions. He'll fight this, Sarah warned. He has money and connections, and he won't go down easy. But fighting from a suspended license is a lot harder than fighting from a position of power. And with the criminal investigation, he'll be focused on protecting himself from prison, not pursuing you. So I'm really safe? Maya asked, almost afraid to believe it. As safe as anyone can be. He'd be stupid to come after you now. You're a witness in a criminal investigation. Anything he does to intimidate or harm you becomes another charge against him. Sarah raised her glass. To Maya, who found her voice and changed the world. They toasted, and Maya felt the last chains of fear begin to loosen their grip. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. Grace woke the entire household at 6 a.m., bouncing with excitement and insisting everyone come downstairs immediately. They gathered around the tree in pajamas, Grace distributing presents with elaborate ceremony. Maya hadn't expected gifts, but there were several with her name on them. From Grace, a hand-painted flower pot with Maya's garden, written in careful letters, and a card that read, "For spring because we're going to grow beautiful things." From Sarah Chen, a leather journal with a note, "For the next chapter." From Ethan, a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm in the shape of a garden gate. "For new beginnings," he said quietly, when she looked at him with questions in her eyes. "Gates that open instead of close. Paths that lead somewhere good." Maya fastened the bracelet around her wrist with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of the gesture. This wasn't just jewelry. This was Ethan saying she belonged, that her place here was real and permanent if she wanted it. After presents, they made breakfast together, pancakes and bacon and entirely too much coffee. Grace chattered about her gifts, about the big snow predicted for tomorrow, about whether they could build a snowman in the garden plot. Normal, beautiful chaos. In the afternoon, Sarah Chen hosted Christmas dinner, and once again Maya found herself surrounded by warmth and acceptance. But this time felt different. She wasn't a stranger seeking shelter anymore. She was part of something, woven into the fabric of this makeshift family. As evening fell and they returned home, Grace drowsy in the back seat, Maya looked at the house with its cheerful Christmas lights and felt something profound settle in her chest. This was home. Not just a place she was staying, but home in the deepest sense, where she was known and valued, where she could be herself without fear, where she was building a future instead of just surviving the present. After they tucked Grace into bed, Ethan found Maya standing in the garden, looking at the mulched beds under moonlight. He joined her without a word, their breath visible in the cold air. "Sarah said something to me at Thanksgiving," Maya said finally. "She said I couldn't be Sarah that no one was asking me to be, but that maybe I could be myself, and that might be enough." Ethan was very still beside her. "What did you say?" "I didn't say anything then because I didn't know what I wanted. I was still so focused on survival that I couldn't think beyond the next crisis." Maya turned to face him. "But I've been thinking about it since, about what it means to really live instead of just survive, about what I want my life to look like." And I want this. I want to work with you and learn from you and watch Grace grow up. I want to plant that garden in spring and see what blooms. I want to keep becoming whoever I'm supposed to be, and I want to do it here, with people who see me for who I am instead of who they want me to be." She took a breath, gathering courage. "Is that okay? Is there room in your life for that?" Ethan reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over the bracelet he'd given her. "Maya, there's been room in my life for you since the moment you stumbled into my headlights. I just didn't want to rush you, didn't want you to feel obligated or like this was something you owed me. You don't owe me anything, but if you're choosing to stay because you want to, because this feels like home, then yes, God, yes. There's room. There's always been room." Maya felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears this time. Tears of relief and hope and the beginning of something new. "I'm choosing to stay. Not because I'm running from Richard, but because I'm running toward this, toward you and Grace, and whatever we're building together. We're building a family, Ethan said softly. It might not look traditional, and it might take time to figure out all the pieces, but that's what this is. You, me, Grace, we're family. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and questioning and full of promise. Maya kissed him back, tasting possibility and new beginnings, and the radical hope that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this happiness. When they pulled apart, both smiling, Maya looked up at the stars scattered across the December sky. Somewhere out there, Richard was dealing with the consequences of his actions. The medical board investigation would continue. The criminal charges would be filed. He would face justice, or something close to it. But that was his story now, not hers. Her story was here, in this garden that would bloom come spring, with this man who'd pulled her from the darkness, and this child who'd reminded her that goodness still existed in the world. Spring arrived earlier than expected, March bringing warmth that coaxed crocuses and daffodils from the ground. Maya and Grace worked side by side, planting the seeds and bulbs they'd ordered, getting dirt under their fingernails and sun on their faces. Ethan supervised from a respectful distance, occasionally offering suggestions that were politely ignored by his gardening team. "Daddy doesn't know anything about flowers," Grace would say, with affectionate dismissal, and Maya would hide her smile. The garden grew throughout April and May, transforming from bare earth to something lush and colorful. Roses climbed the fence, lavender perfumed the air. Black-eyed Susans nodded in the breeze, bright and cheerful. It was beautiful, but more than that, it was theirs. Something they'd created together, proof that dead things could come back to life with patience and care. In June, the criminal charges against Richard were filed. Sarah kept Maya updated on the progress, but Maya found she didn't need to know every detail anymore. She'd given her testimony, done her part. The rest was up to the legal system. She had more important things to focus on, like the business she was helping Ethan grow, the garden she was tending, the life she was actively choosing instead of simply surviving. Grace's 9th birthday came in July with a garden party that filled the backyard with children and laughter. Maya helped with the decorations, baked the cake, and felt her heart swell watching Grace blow out candles and make a wish. Later, as they cleaned up paper plates and deflated balloons, Grace hugged Maya tight and whispered, "I wish that you'd stay forever. That's okay, right?" "That's more than okay," Maya assured her. "That's perfect." 1 year after the night Maya had thrown herself in front of Ethan's car, they held a small ceremony in the garden. Not a wedding, neither of them was ready for that yet, and Maya's divorce from Richard was still being finalized. But a commitment ceremony, witnessed by Sarah Chen and a handful of close friends, acknowledging what they'd built together and promising to keep building. "I promise to be patient while you heal," Ethan said, holding Maya's hands among the flowers they'd planted. "To give you space when you need it and support when you ask for it. To never make you feel small or afraid or less than the incredible person you are." "I promise to keep choosing this," Maya replied, her voice steady and sure. "To keep choosing healing over hiding, growth over fear, this life we're creating together over the safety of isolation. I promise to believe that I deserve good things, even on days when that feels impossible." Grace stood beside them, holding a basket of flower petals, beaming with the satisfaction of someone whose matchmaking had succeeded beyond her wildest hopes. When the ceremony concluded, she threw the petals into the air with dramatic flair, declaring, "Now we're officially a family forever." "We've been a family for a while now, sweetheart," Ethan said, pulling his daughter into a hug that included Maya. "I know," Grace said, "but now it's official. That's different." Later that evening, after the guests had left and Grace had finally gone to bed, Maya stood in the garden watching fireflies dance among the flowers. The air smelled of roses and lavender and the particular sweetness of summer evenings. Ethan joined her, slipping his arm around her waist, and they stood together in comfortable silence. "You know what I realized?" Maya said eventually. "When I ran from Richard that night, I thought I was running toward nothing, just away from pain, into whatever darkness waited. But I was running toward this the whole time, toward you, toward Grace, toward becoming myself again. I just didn't know it yet." "Everything works out the way it's supposed to," Ethan said. "Even the terrible things that bring us to our knees, they lead us somewhere if we're brave enough to keep walking. I'm glad I was brave enough." even though I didn't feel brave, even though I was terrified and broken and convinced I'd destroyed my life. Maya leaned into his warmth. I'm glad I ended up here. Me too. This house was so quiet after Sarah died, full of grief and memories and Grace trying to be strong for me when she should have been allowed to just be a kid. You brought light back. Life, something to hope for beyond just getting through another day. They stood in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the garden they'd brought back from death, and Maya felt the truth of her own transformation. She wasn't the terrified woman who'd stumbled into Ethan's headlights anymore. That woman had been the seed, but what grew from her was something new, stronger, wiser, capable of joy she'd thought was lost forever. The medical board's suspension of Richard's license was upheld on appeal. The criminal trial resulted in a conviction on multiple counts of fraud and unlawful prescribing. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, his reputation destroyed, his career over. When Sarah called with the news, Maya felt only a distant satisfaction. Richard had been the storm she'd survived, but she was done letting him define her story. Her story was here, in this garden where flowers bloomed in defiance of the cold that had tried to kill them. In this house where laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent with grief. In this family they'd stitched together from broken pieces, creating something whole and beautiful from their combined wreckage. Maya had learned that healing wasn't linear, that there would be hard days mixed in with good ones. She still flinched at sudden movements sometimes, still had nightmares about Richard finding her even though he was safely behind bars. But those moments were becoming rarer, the bad days outnumbered by good ones, where she woke up grateful and went to bed content. She'd learned that strength wasn't about never being afraid, but about choosing courage anyway. That asking for help wasn't weakness, but wisdom. That the people who loved you didn't need you to be perfect, just present. Most importantly, she'd learned that she was worth saving, worth fighting for, worth the patience Ethan showed and the faith Grace had and the effort Sarah invested. Not because of what she could do or how she could serve, but simply because she existed and that existence had value. On a crisp October morning 2 years after that rain-soaked night in November, Maya stood in the garden harvesting vegetables they'd planted in spring. Grace helped, though her definition of helping included eating as many cherry tomatoes as went into the basket. Ethan was inside working on a major commercial project that Maya had helped him land, his voice occasionally drifting through the open window as he talked with a client. This was her life now, simple and ordinary and absolutely extraordinary in its normalness. She had work she loved, people who loved her, a future that stretched out full of possibility instead of threat. She'd published her memoir the previous spring under a pen name, telling her story not for revenge, but to help other women recognize the signs of coercive control before it was too late. The book had found its audience, and Maya received letters weekly from women who said her words had given them courage to leave, to speak up, to save themselves. "Maya," Grace called, pulling her from her thoughts. "Come see what I found." Grace was kneeling by the fence, pointing at something in the mulch. Maya joined her and saw what had captured her attention. A tiny seedling pushing through the ground, a volunteer from last year's flowers that had somehow survived the winter and was now reaching toward the sun. "It's a survivor," Grace said with satisfaction. "Like you." Maya smiled and ruffled Grace's hair. "Like all of us," she corrected gently. "Every single one of us is stronger than we think." They knelt together in the dirt, in the garden they'd brought back to life, under the October sun that promised winter was coming but spring would follow. And Maya thought about second chances, about how the worst night of her life had led to the best years, about how sometimes you had to be broken completely before you could be remade into something stronger. She thought about the terrified woman who'd whispered, "Please don't hit me," to a stranger in the rain, and she sent that woman a silent message across time. "You made it. You survived. You're going to be okay. More than okay. You're going to bloom." In the garden of second chances, surrounded by flowers that had grown from devastated ground, Maya finally believed it was true.